Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались з кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів. Робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить. Хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар? Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ. Тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар. Байрактар.
Байрактар.
Байрактар.
Байрактар.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody. It's Enforcer Matt once again, and welcome back to day 219 of the news.
And of course, we're going to be reporting on the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. And, as usual, it is the very start of a brand new week in this war. Every single Thursday is the mark of a new week in the war in Ukraine, and for that reason, the map has been made anew with all brand new markers and all the ones of last week being removed. If you would like to see last week's map and the events that unfolded over those 7 days, make sure to go to yesterday's stream on day 218 and click on that link in the description below, and you should be able to access last week's map. But from here forward, it is a brand new, fresh map showing the events from this week starting today and ending on Wednesday in the next 7 days. But of course, starting off, we've gotten some pretty good news tonight from all around the front lines, especially of the Ukrainians destroying a massive Russian tanks today. Of course, all the news is not grand. We did see that a Ukrainian Su-24 was shot down over the Kherson area. Both pilots did eject. But still, the Ukrainians are steamrolling the Russians still. And as far as we know, the city of Lyman is still under siege as of today, which is a bit of a shock, considering that most Russian forces surrender within 24 hours. So it appears that there may be, I guess you could say, some slightly better troops, Russian troops in Lyman, than there were in other towns. But of course, we're going to start off today's news in all places but Russia. And of course, we're going to be showing the new equipment that will be joining the conscriptive forces that were brought up during the partial mobilization of 300,000 men. Starting off with these stripped T-72s making their way to Ukraine. Now, these T-72s, although called stripped, are not on a pole, but I will say that they are probably going to be turned into a stack of poles once they get hit by a Stugna. Now, let's take a look at this T-72 right here. We see that it's been stripped of all explosive reactive armor. In fact, this is a T-72A. The reason being that you can tell that is that a T-72B3, which is the normal one that we've been seeing used so far by the Russians in the war, has Contact 5 explosive reactive armor, I forgot the name of it there for a second, placed onto the front of the upper glacis, which is this part of the tank where my mouse cursor is circling. And you can see there that the upper hull just looks somewhat flush. But on a T-72A, if I can find you all a picture of one of those, T-72A, you will see here that there is this very distinct V-shaped apparatus that's been welded onto the front upper glacis of the tank. And if we look at this video of these Russian tanks, you can see that very clear V-shaped addition to the upper hull that shows that these don't even have any explosive reactive armor on them. They are nothing more than basic T-72s that are on their way to join the conscripts, which are also poorly equipped. Well, even on some of these, I mean, ew, look at that. There's nothing but rust on some of them in some places, showing that these most likely came from some kind of a far eastern Siberian depot, and nothing similar to the T-72B3s that have been used since the onset of the war, once again showing that the Russians are running out of modern armor and equipment to field their military with. You see the train, of course, goes on and on and on. But the quality of the tanks is exactly the same at the end of the train that they were at the start. Also, is that some Russian guy just standing in the middle of the open freight car door?
It could be.
Going off of that, it's safe to assume that these entire two freight cars at the back of the train are filled with men, and so now they're transporting the tank crews, I'm supposing because they've run out of usable rail cars for one reason or another. They're now transporting the tank crews like cattle, which is very odd to see, but of course very Russian of the situation, I guess you could say. And so with that, that's the end of the video, and once again, a pretty sad sight to see that the Russians are running out of stuff. But then again, it's not too sad. It's actually quite a nice sight, because when you think about it, that means that the Russians are getting even closer to running out of equipment. Of course, they probably have thousands of these older tanks to rely on, older T-62Ms and T-72s, maybe even some of the older T-80s, although those will be fewer in between. But still, the point does stand that these tanks are far less advanced than their slightly upgraded counterparts and will be destroyed much easier and more efficiently by the Ukrainians, meaning that the Russians will only be losing, well, only, they will be losing an entire 3-man crew per each tank, and also another incredibly cheap and very outdated tank. With that, we're now going to be moving up to the city of Moscow. And a lot of y'all have been asking, where is our Russian state TV news segment? And we've got it tonight. Now it looks like our favorite man, the favorite loony guy in Russia, is now talking about the poor state of the Russian military. And so, without further ado, here is his statements on the current partial mobilization. Also, due to the captions being slightly cut off at the bottom, I will make sure to read this off to y'all. So, with that, the audio is also muted, and here we go. It's worrisome. Truly worrisome. There hasn't been a single operation after Kharkiv that would alleviate this bitterness. Nor have there been any returned or added territories. The whole West is starting to mock us. I have a big request for our army. Please start to fight by the regulations. The way you can, the way you've been taught. Let's start announcing newly liberated places. What do you need for this? 300,000 have been mobilized. Oh. I don't even know how to read that off, really. It just goes, oh. And it looks like he's looking at his phone. People say, I want to go. Give me an opportunity. Asmat from Kaliningrad writes, help me get to war. I understand that the most important people for us are the insurers and the financiers. And I'm not joking. It's important for our financial system not to collapse. At the same time, let's not help our enemies while conducting the partial mobilization. For example, peoples of the far north, endangered populations, small ethnic groups, we should take that into account, make it proportionate with respect to the quantity of the mobilized people. Several friends have shown me Western propaganda. They're lying with abandon. But whether they lie or not, let's consider these things. Whatever the army needs, just say so. Us, the civil society, we will support you, or will they? But let's start liberating territories and winning already. It's very important and very necessary about those who ran. Yes, they ran to Kazakhstan. Okay, they ran to Georgia. They say, oi, what's happening? And then they run. Now, we're going to take a quick pause here real quick because, surprisingly enough, our favorite propaganda master, our spin master that we've always joked and ridiculed on this entire war for living in a fantasy land, it appears that reality, although he's a Russian puppet, is also starting to hit him as well, and it's becoming evidently clear even to his propaganda spin and his bias that the Russians are losing the war. It's almost become...
look at his face. Look at his face, too. He doesn't even act chipper anymore.
No, he doesn't act chipper anymore. He doesn't act excited or angry or anything like that. It's now just straight melancholy as the situation is starting to actually take hold of this propaganda puppet, and he is seeing what's really happening. The Russians mobilizing 300,000 men, of course, I think that he's still working off of an unrealistic timetable. To think that the mobilization only started days ago and that those soldiers would have hit the front lines, the Russians would be winning in the next couple of days is unrealistic. But then again, you got to think, going off of that, this guy may be the average, I guess you could say the average crop of Russian people. And now that this partial mobilization has been put into effect and another 300,000 soldiers have been raised, regardless whether it'll take them days or weeks to hit the front lines, and we already know that some of them have hit the front lines just in a matter of days, the Russian public is going to be expecting some kind of success due to that reason immediately, and they're not seeing it. In fact, they're seeing that they're still losing more land. And so now this is going to start putting an idea in panic in the Russian public, like we can see in this propaganda master here, that regardless of what they do, they're going to be defeated. There's no amount of men that they can raise. There's no amount of time that they can try and buy that will turn this war into their favor. It's a losing war at this point, and now even the biggest propaganda master in Russia is starting to see this and verbally say this aloud, which is a massive change from what used to be. So with that, we're going to let this continue to play. Famous bloggers and such, all of it, quote-unquote, ran. Yeah, all of it, quote-unquote, ran. Oi. What's he, British? Listen to this priest from the Optina Hermitage. I think it's interesting to say, right now, everybody is running. So you ran. And when this war ends in a few years, yes, years, and somebody sheds blood, how are you going to come back? How will you return? How will you live? They took a nephew, a husband, a son. Thank God they are not taking fathers. Well, I thought they were. I thought the Russian military was mobilizing fathers. I've seen a couple of videos of that. What is this guy talking? Here we go. While this guy is sitting here and showing some blatant problems that the Russians are having, especially a mass exodus from the country of, I guess you could say, able-bodied fighting men, at the same time, he's still living in a fantasy world like most Russians, and apparently he's not seeing the videos that we've seen of families being stripped of their fathers, and their fathers are now being sent to the front line to die with the rest of them. That's what we've seen, and now this guy here, I suppose you could call him a priest of the Eastern Orthodox Church, he's still living in a fantasy world, much like everyone else in Russia. If they start to bomb Rostov, Kursk, and Bryansk, may somebody defend us? But who? It's interesting to see this, Matthew. This is insane. The whole entire Russian public, including the Russian Eastern Orthodox Church, or I guess you could call it the Russian Patriarchy of the Church, is now even showing that they're afraid that the war is going to turn entirely against them, and Ukrainians are going to be launching offensives into Russia, into Russian-held cities on the border.
Now, that's pretty bad when even they start turning.
Yeah, because he just listed off. Let's go back real quick, so that way everyone can get a little bit of an idea of what this guy's talking about. Rostov, Kursk, and Bryansk. So this priest here is saying that the Ukrainians could begin to bomb or march in the directions of Rostov-on-Don, which right now is, let's measure from the DPR's border, or I guess you could say the Russian annexed area of Ukraine, the unofficial part that's illegal. That is 60 miles. From the actual pre-2014 borders of Ukraine, all the way from the Donetsk front line, where it is right now, that's an entire 103 miles. This priest and the Russian public is so unsure and unconfident in the Russian government or the military's abilities to continue to fight or even hold the front line in this war that they're now thinking that cities 100 miles behind the front lines are at risk of being under attack. He also listed off Kursk and Bryansk, and if you look at Kursk down a major highway, it's a whole 86 miles from the Ukrainian border. And if you look at Bryansk, even further, there's actually, believe it or not, a straight highway that goes from the Ukrainian border to Bryansk. I guess the best one would be the E101. And that is a whole 90 miles away from Ukraine on the largest major highway heading there. And so this priest, probably along with the majority of the public and even this propaganda spin man that we see here, who's constantly been supporting Russia through and through like a diehard, he's now showing a video of a priest that is spreading pandemonium and saying things like the Ukrainians could actually reach that far into Russia and bomb these cities and potentially take them. And that tells you the mindset that the entire Russian public has gotten into at this point. And it's certainly a losing mindset. The Russian government, just for those of you all to know, once you get into this kind of pandemonium and fear, it's very difficult for a government to turn this around. The best thing a government can do historically, like the Soviet Union would, is to whip the public into submission. It's not to try and turn their morale around. It's to put them in fear of acting off of their own fear and either running or giving up. That's the only thing the Russians could do at this point. They'll probably put in emergency draconian measures to start inflicting that kind of stuff on the populace, so that way this fear and low morale doesn't start to tear the entire country apart, and it'll at least try and survive. But by and large, this kind of fear cannot be hidden anymore. This kind of fear can never be quelled in the Russian public. It's now in full swing. It will never stop. The Russians can try, and I guess you could say, hide the symptoms of this disease, but this disease is well rooted in the Russian public, in Russian society at this point. And now it's just a matter of the clock ticking down as to when these fears boil over and actually lead the Russian government to having to step out of this war or to inflict draconian measures onto the public. And so with that, we're going to let this continue. And he says, Rostov Kursk, may somebody defend us, but who? And of course, he's talking about the missing Russian men that have now left the country. If you hid your nephew in the basement of your dacha, which is a Russian house, who will defend us? By the way, he won't be able to sit there for years. If you don't take up your cross, you'll get two instead. I don't even know what that means. You could get a heart attack or a stroke out of fear. Well, now he's just drawing assumptions. You could get a heart attack and not even make it to war. And then, and now, oh my gosh, Matthew, look at this. The propaganda master who's been begging for war, begging for genocide even at points, now says, of course, we don't want war.
Oh, wow. What a change.
What a change. It seems that
I
now...
know what brought that on.
I wonder, it may be that the Russians are winning the war so well, they finally turned it around just 7 months into the 3-day special military operation, that now they don't really want the war. I don't know. It doesn't... Oh, man. Anyways, we're going to let this continue. Of course, we don't want war. This wasn't our choice. This was the choice. Oh, wait a minute. I had hope. I had faith there for a minute, but of course he went down the typical path. The West forced us into this war. How? You could have just avoided the war. In fact, you could be amenable to the West. You could somewhat join our sphere of influence. It would make Russia far more successful than it's been. Why not? Why in the world were y'all forced into this decision as a fourth-rate country with really a 11th-rate economy and probably a 12th-rate military? Who in the world forced you into doing this? No one but Putin. And that's that. I'm just amazed at what's happening in the world. And look at his demure nature. He's still just down in the dumps. I think to myself, what's happening is just not right. What's going on is not right. It's like the world had lost its way. Or has the Russians lost their way? That's a better question. There is no more wrong and right. The lies or the truth. Well, I would actually have to counter these two statements. There is a wrong and the right. The Russians are the wrong. Ukraine is in the right. The lies are not discernible in Russia because the Russians do nothing but lie. And of course, here on this channel, and a lot of pro-Ukrainian channels, along with many other people who are reporting this news, there's a lot of truth to be found. Although that takes a lot of leeway with mainstream media, of course. But a lot of more truth can be found here in the West than over there in Russia. And of course, we know this because we've been here for long enough to see that the Russians will lie about anything. They'll even lie about the color of the sky. Everything is in some kind of gray zone. You know, it's almost like the Russian spin doctor has seen a couple of major defeats of the Russian military and has now been shooken up enough that he doesn't even believe in the Russian cause anymore. What do you think, Matthew?
I really couldn't tell you, to be totally honest. I'm swamped over here.
Matthew's trying to moderate the live chat, so sadly he can't comment. But I would have to say, I don't know about y'all, but it looks like the Russians, even the people highest up in their propaganda spin department, are now losing faith in this war. And it's hilarious to see because when Ukraine was being invaded in the first week of this war, I never lost faith in Ukraine, especially after they stopped the Russians outside of Kyiv, out in the Bucha Hostomel Irpin area. At that point, it was clear that this war would not be 3 days long or a week long. It would drag on for quite some while. Of course, with the Ukrainians slowly turning the tide and beating the Russians back. The Russians, on the other hand, even when this war started to defy all of their initial, very optimistic expectations of this war lasting only 3 days or a week, and then a week turned into 2 weeks, and then a month, and then 2 months, and then 3 months, and we're all the way now in the 8th month of the war. In fact, I think we are in the... I remember we did the math last night on stream. It's somewhere near the 7th or the beginning of the 8th. We're now this far into the war, And the Russians have finally seen, after their military has been whittled down to a nub, they've lost more than half of their operational tank force. They've lost almost 1 in every 4 helicopters in their helicopter force, 1 in every 5 planes in their air force, 56,000 men, and a many other multitude of things that we could continue to break down and cover, and of course have lost the very small yet fragile economy that they had starting off in this war. They've now finally seen that the writing's on the wall. The war is an unwinnable feat. It's something that the Russians can't do. The military never had the power or the know-how to be able to actually annex Ukraine from the very start. And now, even the very people at the very top of this entire circle, except for Putin most likely, are seeing that winning this war is an impossibility. And all of the attempts that they've tried to make sure that they at least get something out of it are most likely in vain. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little Russian propaganda flick and down on into the region of Dagestan, just directly west of Chechnya, where we saw today that the head... Now, Matthew, this is a little interesting. The head of Dagestan, much like the head of Chechnya, you know, like Ramzan Kadyrov, the head of Dagestan is actually Sergei Melikov, and he played a video that I hadn't seen, but he saw. And it's a video of a Russian military commissariat driving around the city in a truck with a megaphone and shouting out of it that all able-bodied men in a city in Dagestan were to report to the conscription office immediately for service. And this has outraged this man so much, even being a puppet of the Russians and of course being put in this position by Putin, that he has now come out publicly and condemned this act. And so with that, here's the video, and I think y'all should be able to see the caption. So, here we go.
Может военком Дербента с подобным текстом отправлять людей всем гражданам мужского пола города Дербента.
Oh, wait a minute. Hang on. We just got, while we get back to the rant, we just got an answer as to why the Russians are being found on the front lines dead with a passport on them. They're being told to report to the conscription office with a passport. That's why they just carry them on into the front with them. That's insane. I don't know if that's something that the U.S. military does or a lot of Western militaries do as well, but I have never heard of having to report to the conscription office with a passport. Maybe I just haven't been in the recruiting loop enough, but that's the reason why, because some of y'all have asked on stream. It's an excellent question, because I haven't had an answer for it until right now. Why are Russian soldiers found dead on the front lines with their passports on them? And we've never had an answer. We've never had an answer for the POWs that have been found with their passports on them as well. But now we got the answer. They're being told to show up and keep those on them. And I guess that's the way that the military identifies these soldiers. They probably get dog tags as well, but they're also carrying around passports for identification purposes as well. So with that, we're now going to let the video continue as this guy actually lambasts the Russian army on Russian state TV.
Вы мне скажите, что это за идиоты? Всем гражданам мужского пола срочно прибыть в военный комиссариат, при себе иметь военный билет. Вы что, дебилы, а? Кто их уполномочил ездить по городу?
Well, who authorized him to drive around the city? Well, we all know who that is. That would be the Russian army. And I think this man may be in a little bit of hot water. He's a brave man, and I like that he's standing up for the people of Dagestan, but at the same time, he's putting himself in a little bit of a tricky position, because of course, this is a partial mobilization in the entire Federation, which rhymes. But moving on from that, that means that this was authorized by none other than the central government under Vladimir Putin. And so while he's standing up for the people of Dagestan, he may be getting himself into a lot of trouble making statements like this, but it's also showing very clearly that even the people who've been put in charge by Putin at this point are now bucking the idea of continuing this war and doing partial mobilizations like have been said to have been conducted, like we're seeing here. And another thing, that's adding to the pressure of this man, most likely, and this is why he has probably been one of the first to come out and berate publicly the Russian army and their conscription actions, is that if we've seen anything in Russia, The riots are the most common in Dagestan. In fact, they've gotten so bad that the Russian military and the military police have been called out to fire at and over the protesters to try and quell them. And as what we saw, it was to no avail. As far as we know, those riots may still be going on in Dagestan. And so this guy is probably looking at an insurrection that could be occurring in Dagestan and seeing that his neck could be on the line. People could storm the governor's mansion down there in this area and put him on a pike. And so he's probably trying to do this to put himself in good favor with the public. But with that, we're going to let the video continue.
Ничто иное, как распространение фейковой информации, за которую сегодня тоже предусмотрены статьи Уголовного кодекса.
And I like how he says this. This is a very interesting statement. And hopefully, Matty, you're not too busy, because this one requires both of our brains to be put together. He just saw a Russian military commissariat going around the city with a megaphone saying this, and now he says it's nothing less than the spreading of fake information, for which criminal charges also exist. So now he's suggesting that the Dagestan police, or I guess you could say the Russian Central Police, are going to arrest this commissariat on criminal charges for following orders on a partial mobilization.
Now, that would be actually interesting if they did that.
That would be very interesting, and from an actual government perspective, they wouldn't have any authority to do this. This is an inferior power to the central, I guess you could say, federation government, and so he would be well out of his league to have the Dagestan police go and arrest this commissariat, but if he did, power to him. It's not going to fare well for him, but that's a brave guy, and it's good to see that some people are finally seeing the stupidity in this war and standing up against it. And so with that, that is pretty interesting. We're now going to be moving on from this little bit of news, and I will be showing y'all a quick snippet, the actual video of the commissariat driving around in a police car. Of all things, this man actually, he doesn't know what's going on. Apparently, the commissariat was driving around with a megaphone in an actual police car from Dagestan and calling this out to the public. So here's the video. Now, watching this video, there's no question that the governor of Dagestan is certainly lying to the public, because he said clearly at the very beginning that it was a commissariat that was going around saying this on a megaphone, but then at the end, it seemed like he may have been trying to suggest that it was someone trying to play a prank, but you can see here clearly, that's a Russian police car. So, it's not a prank. That's the actual Russian military that's commandeered a police car to conduct these activities. And so if he has a problem with anyone, he has a problem with the Russian government, the Russian army, and at the end of it all, Putin and what they're doing. And so I don't know if he'll be falling out of a window soon, but I've got to commend him for at least his bravery. And speaking of bravery, and also crazy things that the commissariats have now been getting up to, now seeing that the situation in Russia is falling apart and men are fleeing the country by the tens of thousands a day, in Vladivostok, a commissar took it into his personal authority to climb through the window of an apartment building's lobby, or I guess you could say a Khrushchevka lobby, to get in and start handing out conscription papers. And so with that, here's the video. Also, we're going to have to mute it. But there's
Is that the Pink Panther theme?
It may have been, I don't know. But we can see the commissariat here, climbing through the window. He hit his head on the roof. Let's watch that again. He gets down a little bit. Boom! Now his head is throbbing from slamming his head into the roof. He now almost slips and falls. He finally gets down. And now it looks like he's wiping off his hands after almost breaking his neck. And now he's brought in other conscription officers that are probably attached to the commissar's office to start handing out conscription papers. I cannot stand this, Matthew. I cannot stand how the Russian army allows their soldiers to wear anything other than the standard issue boots and shoes. Like, this guy looks like he's wearing some kind of sneakers. And I cannot stand that.
He really does.
Yeah, it's such an ununiform and poor look. We can see them all now marveling at the feat of the man who climbed through the window to let them in, but now they're on their way to start handing out the mobilization papers. Pretty insane to see. And of course, it shows how desperate the Russian military has gotten to actually try and get men for the conscription. With that, we're now finally going to be moving out of Russia, and all of the fun and, well, I say that sarcastically, fun and interesting news that we've gotten from there, showing that they're having a perfect time running their country and they have absolutely no problems at all. And we're now going to be moving down into our location unknowns. But before we get there, we're going to take a quick pause to address some polls from the chat and also a couple of questions as well. And so, without further ado, take it away, Matthew.
All right, folks, and it is now time for our first question segment of the stream. And once again, it's a very busy night in the live chat with a lot of questions, super chats, and polls. So the first two polls that we have, the first one said, should our favorite Russian propagandist be sent to the front lines in the war? Now, this is a very shocking result. 93% said yes, give him a big dose of reality, and only 7% said no, it wouldn't serve a purpose. Now, very clearly, 93% is a very large amount of people voting for yes, and I would have to wholeheartedly agree. But Enforcer, what do you think?
Well, I would have to say that the 99.9% of people that voted for the propagandists to be sent to the front lines are, of course, patriots and defending the motherland. Getting past the joke about the Russians and their stupid referendums, surprisingly, believe it or not, that poll is real. And 93% of y'all will like to see the propagandists sent to the front. And I couldn't agree more. Why not send the most vocal of the pro-Russians to the front line so that way they can actually see the reality of it all? Now, this guy's already getting disillusioned in the Russian cause, and he's never been on the front line once. And so you can probably get the good idea that he would end up surrendering and most likely becoming a prisoner of war on the Ukrainian side if he actually did go down there. And so I would have to largely agree with the overwhelming majority of y'all that I would like to see the propaganda sent to the front so that way he can actually experience what this war is truly like. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next poll was a little bit more complex than that first one. And the question is, what do you think of Russian citizens that have stood by during the invasion and now want to leave? 21% said they are as guilty as Russia's soldiers. 30% said they should not be allowed into Europe. 26% said they are refugees, not guilty. And 23% said both options 1 and 2. Now, on this one, it's a little bit tricky because it gets into if we're going to start blaming citizens for the crimes of the military and the government. But I would have to say, if I had to pick an option, I'd have to go with both options 1 and 2. I think that it's kind of a little bit, I don't know, two-faced. They stayed in the country, and some of them have supported the war, and now that they see it's going south, they want to get out. But it just depends. I think there's some middle ground here for consideration of different circumstances. But Enforcer, what do you think?
I would have to say that I'm trying to think about this. It's a very difficult moral dilemma, and I like the polls that Matthew throws up because sometimes they do ask difficult questions, and that's what makes the polls interesting. Now, if I had to answer it, I would have to go with the majority, the 29% that voted for they should not be allowed into the EU. Because are they as guilty as Russian soldiers? Some of them probably not. Some of them may have been trying to see if they could stay in Russia and weather the entire thing out without really having to do anything, make sure that their families stay safe, and now they're seeing that the mass mobilization, well, the partial mobilization, is not going to make that possible, and now they're trying to flee the country with their family, although at the border of Kazakhstan, we didn't see any families, we just saw able-bodied men, so that kind of throws a wrench into that story, but still, I don't think they should be allowed into the EU, even if they are as guilty or not as guilty as Russian soldiers. One does have to remember that we've seen a lot of videos from the European Union of these people, these Russians, in the European Union, really terrorizing Ukrainians, vandalizing historical monuments with the Z, and also on top of that, going around and just causing general mayhem and supporting Russia while not even living in Russia. That's probably the oddest part of it, is that they're not even living in Russia. They're reaping the benefits of the Western world, yet they support Russia through and through, which, if it was by Russians, means they wouldn't have a Western world to enjoy. And so in that regard, I would have to say that they couldn't go into the European Union. I would have to agree with the 30% of y'all now that have voted for that option. Because if you think, because trying to expound on it a little bit more, these Russians are mostly men, as we've seen, the able-bodied men that throughout the large majority of this war have said, I will fight and I will die for Russia because I think the Ukrainians ought to die. They've said stuff like that often. And now that they've actually had the risk of being called up to go and serve in the army, they're now trying to leave the country en masse. And for that reason alone, I don't think they should be allowed to enter the EU, because these are the able-bodied men that have most likely been backing up this war for the last 7 months, and now that it's finally come to the barrel of the gun being aimed at them, they're going to try and jump ship and flee to the very place that they've said they wanted to destroy for the past several months. And so in that regard, I would have to say, while they may not be as guilty as Russian soldiers in some certain cases, I wouldn't allow them into the European Union. And so with that, I hope that addresses the poll fairly well, and we are on to the next one if we have one, and if not, we're on to the questions.
All right, so that was our last poll for this segment, but many more are to come. And we have now our first super chat, which goes to Chris Mack, who puts in a very generous $100 donation and says, "You two continue to work hard every single day. Go out and have some fun. Question: what is your take on Putin stealing Ukrainian territory? If Ukraine continues the defense, will Putin use nukes as he has been threatened? Love you both."
And thank you so much for the massive amount of support, Chris Mack. You continue, let's see, go out and have some fun. I do try and go out and have some fun the best I can. Funnily enough, the 2 college classes I go to in person have now become the places that I just try and have fun at. And of course, I'm not just, cutting out and acting like a fool or anything. I try and just ask questions and, of course, enjoy my time there, because it's about the only moment these days that I get to just sit down and not really do anything and just watch someone else do something. And also, I find the classes pretty interesting. If that professor is watching, hope you've been enjoying tonight's stream. I do find your class interesting. Moving on to the next part. Question: what is your take on Putin stealing Ukrainian territory? Well, obviously, I'm not really a pro-Russian. Well, not a pro-Russian by any means. I'm pro-Ukrainian. I have a friend in Ukraine, and I consider it outright illegal. The invasion was already an illegal premise. Trying to annex the territory that they hardly have a hold on right now is far more illegal than the invasion itself, considering it's a offshoot and a product of it. And so for that reason, I would have to say that it's entirely illegal, and that this should be condemned by every nation in the world, and that very, I'm trying to think of how to say this, very harsh sanctions should come from the remaining neutral countries that are left, like the Indians and the Chinese. Now, moving on from that, if Ukraine continues the defense, and then they're really on the offense at this point, they've kind of turned the war into their favor, will Putin use nukes as has been threatened? Love to you both, and thank you once again for the kind words, Chris. And also, to address that last part, if the Ukrainians continue on the offense, and seeing the Russian public now swaying in the complete opposite direction, and now they are no longer in favor of the war, the Russian government is going to have a loose hold on things. A lot, and the public doesn't really determine the exact outcome. It always requires that the public is against the government, and that there are a decent portion of the military that are against the government as well. That's usually how an overthrow is conducted. If you look at the Russian Revolution, it wasn't the peasants of Russia that rose up against the Tsar and overthrew him alone. It was, in fact, the peasants along with a lot of support from the army. So in that regard, they'll require a lot of support from the army. And considering that 300,000 conscripts have just been mobilized, the Russian army is now tipped its scale to a lot of demoralized and probably unhappy soldiers that are very critical of the Russian government are now in its ranks, and now can, of course, mutiny. And so with that in mind, I would have to say that it may start to head in the direction that very opportunistic politicians and leaders, minor leaders in Russia, will try and seize the opportunity to overthrow Putin, so that way they can enter into a reign, as I do not see any democratic country in the future in Russia at all. It's historically and culturally not possible. They will most likely try and enter into a reign of good favor with the public, as they'll have overthrown Putin and ended an incredibly unfavorable war. And so with that, I hope that addresses the questions fairly well, Chris Mack, and thank you so much once again for the wonderful support, as your support helps this channel to keep on running. And without supporters like y'all, it's not possible to run these streams. And so with that, thank you so much once again, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and next up, we have a $55 super chat from Dio Split, who says, so who do you think sabotaged the Nord Stream pipeline? My bet is Russia. Slava Ukraine.
And thank you so much for the support. And also, to address that real quick, I would have to say that the Russians most likely sabotaged the Nord Stream pipelines. The Swedes, a viewer actually told me before the stream, and thank you so much. I will not name you off, but I do thank you so much for listing that information. Apparently, the Swedes have also now found a rupture on the Nord Stream pipeline somewhere off the coast of the Gotland Island. Which is owned by Sweden. If you look at the actual ownership of the islands in the Baltic Sea, Denmark controls a decent portion of them, but Sweden controls this strip. I believe it's actually just called Åland. You can see that right there. And then the Gotland Island. And then, of course, a couple of more minor islands that are off their coast. And then, I believe, not getting all into the geography of the Baltic Sea and also the Gulf of Bothnia, but I believe the Finns control these islands here. It's almost an archipelago that extends out of Turku. But moving on from that, I believe that the Russians sabotaged this pipeline in multiple areas. The seismologists recorded explosions on the pipeline, as was confirmed yesterday, and these explosions were of a significant size and scale to suggest that a submarine must have fired a torpedo directly at the pipeline, which exploded directly on it or directly alongside it, causing the ruptures. And so for that reason, I would have to say that the Russians, as far as the information we've gotten now, have most certainly been the ones that sabotaged the pipeline and have led to, at this point, 4 recorded massive ruptures that are now spewing natural gas into the Baltic Sea. Also, another quick thing to mention is that the Nord Stream pipelines have actually been cut off for about 2 to 3 weeks at this point, from what I was able to research. And the gas that is now, I guess you could say, flowing out of the pipelines is gas that is continuing to be pumped out after they shut it off. The pipeline is so long that it takes weeks for the the gas that enters the pipeline near St. Petersburg to reach its way all the way down the Baltic and into Germany. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and thank you so much for the support, and also a pretty good question. I'm still trying to do research on the Nord Stream pipelines, so my information isn't as good as it could be, but we are trying to work on honing our combined knowledge, both Matthew and me, on the Nord Stream pipeline, its economic, I guess you could say, effects, and also the situation that's revolving it right now, considering that it's one of the most important economic ties that Russia has with the European Union. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right, and I believe this is our last one for the segment.
It is.
It goes to Tangen, formerly known as Tangen Bragiri, a longtime channel supporter, who puts in a $50 donation and says, "Thumbs up, everyone."
And also, I'm pretty surprised you read it like that, because it says thumbs up everyone 9. I don't know where the 9 came from, but I do thank you for the support. Also, if you could clarify where the 9 came from, Tang, that would be interesting.
I think that might have been an error if I saw him correctly in the live chat earlier.
Oh, I was about to say, like, what is the 9 supposed to mean? I was like, is that a hidden message or something? I would have been interested to know. But I thank you. Also, real quick. I got a bot. I got one. But with that, I thank you so much for the support, Tang, and of course, thank you for helping this channel keep on running. You've been a channel supporter for the longest time. In fact, as far back as I can remember at this point. And so I thank you so much for being an old guard of the Lee Spring Army and helping this channel to keep on running. Because without viewers like you, of course, like I say, this isn't possible. And just a quick little PSA to everyone who's watching. If you do enjoy the stream and would like this to continue, we continue solely off of viewer support. We don't run any ads on the streams, and we run ads on videos. We have run ads on videos in the past, finally, because we found out that YouTube actually promotes the videos more if you put ads on them, because then they have an incentive to promote them. But by and large, our entire channel survives solely off of super chats from our viewers. So we don't make any way to keep ourselves alive unless if it's y'all support. And so if you would like to keep this channel running and you enjoy what we're doing, please make sure to throw in a super chat. And if you would like to support Ukraine, that option is available every single Sunday on the Sunday night fundraiser, just in case if you're new and you haven't heard this before. But with that, we're now going to be moving out of this question segment and on into our next segment of news, starting off with our location unknowns. And we've actually had a pretty sizable amount of them today. Starting off with a pretty lengthy bit of Ukrainian combat footage taken today. And so without further ado, here's the video. It appears to be taken on top of a Humvee, because you can see the 50 cal on top, and you can also see the boxy shape of a Humvee cab below. But with that, here's the video. So when you see the Humvee, Trucking on along down the dirt road, we can also see a Humvee in front of them, kicking up some dust. We hear some kind of scratching noise. I couldn't really tell if that was an artillery shell or not. We now see the Humvee's taking a left turn. We can see that the 50 cal belt popped out of the box. We can also see that a specific note's been made about that at the top of the screen. Apparently the 50 cal will jam later on because of that. Apparently the field that the Humvee is advancing into is under fire at the moment, and the Ukrainians are going to try and speed through as fast as they can to try and avoid the artillery fire, because they have to head in this direction, but it's already been pre-sighted according to the caption below. This driver down here is putting in the work. Look at him, man. This guy is spinning that wheel as hard as he can sometimes to keep that thing going in a straight line.
And what's he messing with on the phone?
I couldn't really tell. I was wondering about that too. I didn't make a comment because I couldn't tell. But we now see the gunner, the cameraman, trying to put the belt back into the box and try and get that 50 cal ready to go, because of course the belt being in that condition isn't really conducive for firing. And I gotta say, the Humvee's handling this kind of farmland well. It's not really looking like it's bouncing around too much, but I think that's also a huge credit to the driver, who's putting in the 110% amount of effort to keep this thing going. We can hear the faint sound of an artillery shell right there. You now see the
Caption, though.
Yeah, I was about to say, the caption says it in a very creative and flavorful way, but he is saying that he'll deal with a 50 caliber belt at a later time. And this Humvee is zooming. I bet you this Humvee is going about its top speed. Now they're saying that the field behind them that they just came from, you can actually see it, is getting hit. And that shows you how fast this Humvee's been moving, is that they were moving through that field on the video, and now it looks like it's nearly a quarter or a half mile away from them. Now the Humvees are spinning around real quick. And now this guy is talking to himself. It looks like this guy has also had a problem with bots. Or I guess you could say the actually know-it-alls in the comment section of his videos, because he's talking for someone that's probably would be in his comment section saying, you should get a Mark 19 ammo can to hold your ammo. That was pretty funny. Everyone deals with bots. Yeah, no crap. That would be nice. I've been trying to source some since day one of me being in the Humvee. We work with what we got. Looks like he's already addressed his haters, and the Humvee is still going on. The Russians, according to the caption. And now this guy is literally doing a Q&A with himself with the pre-made questions in his head. Why don't you have ready ammo up in your turret? The answer will be coming momentarily. Since I have no room up here and it can't be tied down, it gets thrown everywhere. Back inside the truck, and one can is in one of these fields. I'll repack all this after we stop. He's now trying to mess with the belt again, which is still not in the box in a good way. It keeps on getting thrown around. And it looks like you may have gotten it sorted a little. Okay, round two. We waited until their artillery was getting relocated. Now we are assaulting our objective. This is that field that was shelled immediately when we arrived the first time. We can hear a little bit of fire coming from the first Humvee in the group, and we can now see that this Humvee, with the cameraman on, is also firing into the bush in front of them. Now we can see that the gun has jammed due to the rounds being in a very odd position starting the firing. And we can now see him trying to fix that as fast as he can. We can see that the cover is not really wanting to close, but he's still trying to work with the gun and see if it'll work with him. We now see him firing behind the Humvee, and now he's pulling out the RPG. He's now loading the RPG-7. It's loaded. He's now aiming over the top of the Humvee towards the position that the Russians are at in the distance. He's waiting for the other Humvee to clear. Now he fires off the RPG at their position, throws the RPG down below, and then gets the 50 cal back onto him again. Fires off a few rounds. The Humvees are still circling. It's almost like a cavalry raid, which is very wild to see that hundreds of years in the future, raids are still conducted in almost the exact same way. You now see him firing off the machine gun, and when you still see him addressing the know-it-all, seeing his captions, because apparently he's had a lot of people who have come in and of course just know everything. And then real quick, while this video continues and we watch him continue on this raid, that is something that everyone on YouTube has to deal with. And of course, I don't know everything, and I'm willing to admit that and do research whenever there's a little bit of a leeway or we may be getting stuff wrong. But there are people out there, and I bet y'all have seen them in the live chat, that know everything on planet Earth and have the answer to everything. And apparently, even this actual member of the Ukrainian armed forces fighting in the country has know-it-alls telling him exactly how to win the war, which is hilarious to me that it doesn't even stop there.
So the soldier's writing the captions?
Yeah, apparently this is his video, and later on he edited in the captions himself, and he's addressing the people who must be in the comments of this video.
Can you imagine somebody critiquing a soldier on how to fight a war? No, dude, you're supposed to shoot that way. It's like, come on, man, you're not on the battlefield.
Yeah. Oh, man. And now we can see he's saying he's about to go airborne. Apparently he's about to be thrown out of the seat. So now he's trying to get low and hold on to the handlebars as this Humvee once again rips across the open ground. Now we can see that they actually stopped. And oh, wait. Wait a minute.
Oh, he dropped his weapon?
Yeah, they stopped the Humvee because apparently the door wasn't locked, and so it flung open mid-spin of the Humvee, taking a hard turn, and the AK went flying out the door, so they had to come to a full stop, and one of them had to get out of the Humvee and go running for his gun. Oh, man, the occasional slip-up. And actually, we can hear this guy speaking English, and someone actually just said in the live chat, this is an American Foreign Legion member, and that's good to know. I actually didn't know that. I thought he may have been a Ukrainian. We never heard him speak in the video yet, but it is cool to see that an American is in Ukraine, still representing our country incredibly well. Apparently, he is the only foreigner in the truck, but the rest of the Ukrainians speak English, which is good news. Now we can see the Humvee racing along. You see a bit of the speed of how fast this thing is moving down the dirt road. Maybe 60, maybe even pushing 70 miles an hour. Now see them trying to get out of there before the artillery gets on their position and starts giving it to them. And now we can, of course, see him answering the know-it-alls questions again. What was the point of the mission? And he's about to answer it. Don't worry about it. I like that answer. The Humvee is ripping literally across an open field right now. The thing's just shaking around. Gosh, it's unbelievable. I wonder what kind of suspension these Humvees have to be able to handle this. And I wonder if
it must have leaf springs.
It must have leaf springs. And I wonder if it's able to handle this well, or if they have a lot of spent shocks and suspension problems after these kinds of raids. Gosh. And now he's saying that somewhere in the field there's a full can of 50, because the 50 caliber ammo can that was in, I guess you could say, the turret basket with them went flying out when they hit a bump. So they're now missing a can of 50 caliber ammo.
So that's what they're searching for?
Apparently not. Apparently they're trying to get out of the field as fast as possible, and he just made that as a comment. You know, that somewhere out there's a missing can of ammo. And we can see him explaining, oh, wait a minute, he just put the safety on the 50 caliber. And he was also explaining right there that they were doing that erratic pattern to make sure that the artillery wouldn't be able to just, you know, I guess you could say lead and then hit them as they were trying to get out of there. Gosh, I just can't believe the speed that this Humvee's going at. Like, it's really brave for this guy to be this high up in this little basket here with this thing going that fast. You can also see the artillery raining down in the distance, like he just said. The Russians, of course, were firing artillery off before they got there. They raced through it, conducted the raid, fired at the Russians, and then got out of there just in time to miss the barrage that the Russians had already pre-aimed, most likely, into that field. The other road parallel with us just got lit up, and of course we're seeing that in the distance. God, man, I don't even know if what's the top speed of a Humvee? That's a great question. What is the top speed of a
I'm going to guess 65.
I'm going to guess
Just a wild
70.
guess.
70 miles an hour.
That's so close.
It's so close. 70 miles. So that means that this guy, the driver of this Humvee, which was a Ukrainian, was putting all this Humvee had into it to try and get that thing out of there. And that's pushing a Humvee to its limits.
Wait, how much horsepower does a Humvee have?
What is the horsepower of a Humvee? That's a great question. 190 horsepower.
Wow, a 6.2 liter diesel. That's a gas guzzler right there.
Gee, what kind of miles per gallon? What is the miles per gallon? Now
It's gallons per mile, Enforcer.
4 miles per gallon in the city,
gosh.
and 8 miles per gallon on the highway. What is the fuel tank on a Humvee?
We need an EcoBoost Humvee next.
Military Humvee with fuel capacity of up to 350 gallons.
Dang.
Oh, wait a minute. It actually has a 25-gallon fuel tank. So
I was about to say, there's no way that holds 350 gallons.
I was about to say, that thing is literally just a fuel truck on wheels, and that looks like a little cool, like, car, I guess. That would have been insane if it actually had a fuel capacity of 350 gallons. It only has a 25-gallon tank. So going off of that, the Humvee only has a range of about 100 miles in a city, and probably about 200 miles on a highway. So not the longest range vehicle, but it does look like it's getting the job done for these Foreign Legion members and these Ukrainians that are inside of this Humvee, and of course, an excellent raid. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a Russian tank. 1 second, let me make sure I got this correct. Actually, this is a Russian tank being hit by a Ukrainian tank, and we saw it from the perspective of a Ukrainian infantryman. And so here's the video. Russian tank in the distance. Ukrainian tank fired. They hit it. And the infantry is cheering as the Russian tank was knocked down. So with that, that's the end of the video. And pretty cool to see that the Ukrainian tanks are now engaging the Russian tanks head-to-head and taking them out, which is the most interesting thing. This also isn't the first video like its kind in this Location Unknowns. There's another one. With that, we're now going to be moving on into the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see the Russians making another propaganda flick on the Tor-2M, or the Tor-M2. Of course, read the caption here. Russian Tor-M2 anti-aircraft missile systems crew shielding the troops. Shielding takes some very excessive liberties of making it sound like this Tor is literally saving the Russian army, the troops from attacks by enemy air targets in Ukraine. And so here's the video from the Russian Ministry of Defense of this Tor-2 in action. When you see one of its missiles fired off, and we now see the mammoth $15 million anti-aircraft vehicle. About 20 to 30 of these we've seen destroyed in Ukraine. Honestly, that thing looks stupid. And I know that someone's about to say, well, it gets the job done. No, it does not. It does not. It looks stupid, and it doesn't get the job done either. We now see, I guess you could say, the SAM missile bays. We can also see the display of the Tor, as it appears to be attempting to fire at some kind of Ukrainian drone or vehicle. That honestly looks like a drone target, like they would use in training practices. And I know that's a very indistinct dot, but considering that it hardly looked like it was moving at all, I think that was more so a training video showing the Tor M2 earlier before the war. But this Tor is specifically in Ukraine because it does have Z's marked on the side of it. You now see them showing the same footage almost over again as it drives through the same burned field. And with that, that's the end of the video, and not much to say, just another Russian propaganda flick. We are now on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where you see the Ukrainians mauled a tornado MLRS battery. And when I say mauled, it's literally mauled. I can't even tell if this was an MLRS before.
Добре, ураганов стояло, бля. Попали.
And I don't know about y'all, but this looks like a thorough destruction of an MLRS battery. But I may be wrong, you know.
Пизды, блядь, получили, бля. Хорошая артиллерия была здесь, блядь, ебашила.
And to add insult to injury, a tree fell on top of some of the trucks, making sure to take them out doubly. But with that, that's the end of the video, and it's great to see that the Ukrainians have once again knocked out another MLRS battery. The Russians, of course, have been using artillery to attack civilian targets, mostly, along with the occasional military target. It's great to see that these pretty much weapons of genocide have been knocked out. We're now moving on into the next clip of Location Unknown news, where we saw a destroyed T-90A, once again showing that the Russians are most likely going to be losing hope soon. Of course, there's music. We got to mute that for copyright reasons, but you see the T-90 there. Huh. In the caption, it said a destroyed BMP-3, but I really got to be honest with you. I don't... If you didn't know a lot about APCs and what each one looked like, you could really assume that that was any BMP. It is a BMP-3, however. It does have the two distinct rear doors over the engine bay. But golly, I don't think there's a lot left of that BMP. With that, that's the end of that video, and we're now going to be moving on into the next one, where we saw another captured Russian tank, this time a T-72B3. And of course, the caption makes it clear that this one was captured with intact Contact 1 and 5 bricks, and you can see those there. We now see the Ukrainian soldier standing on top of another Russian captured Russian flag, and that's the end of that video. And great to see that the Ukrainians have been giving it to Russia's armor over the past 24 hours, destroying a decent amount of it, and also capturing some of it. We're now moving on into the next clip, where we can see the Ukrainians conducting a food review. And real quick, Matthew, take it over and do a quick little review, bro, impression.
Welcome back, guys, to the weekly food review running on empty.
I love it.
That was a lame one.
Actually, I thought it was really good. Run a poll on that in a minute. See if people like that one, because I honestly love that impression. I think you do it quite well. But anyways, here's the Ukrainian soldier conducting a food review on a Franco-British supplied ration box. And so let's see what a British MRE looks like that's been provided to the Ukrainians. First off, nice box, looks good and fresh, and loads of stuff inside. Thing is packed. We can see a milky drink, so some kind of a powdered milk. I like how they call it a milky drink and not powdered milk. Apparently it's not close enough to being powdered milk. It just makes the water milky tasting, so it's just a milky drink. We see some more packets, sugar packets. Some meatballs and sauce. Known in America as a Swedish meatball. We can also see lentils with chorizo. My mother is having a fit over these. My mother loves lentils for some reason. I also love chorizo, so it's the blend of both worlds, the best of both. See what appears to be some crackers. I'm not sure if they're saltines. Saltines are my favorite. A lot of crackers, loads of crackers. Definitely going to be getting your wheat for the day.
Ага. Это лимон.
Some kind of flavoring.
Лимон
Lemon
напиток.
flavor for a drink.
Напитка.
So you get some lemonade.
Так. Какао.
Loads
Чай.
of like little seasonings. There's some tea in there. More tea.
Так, это
So kind of a dark packet. Can't really tell you what it is. It's something in French.
так, 2 кофе. Это какой-то джем. Стоп. Угу.
Guava paste. What in the world does that taste like?
Гуава. Так.
That's some French
джема.
stuff if I've ever heard of it, Matthew. If you're in the French army, you get guava paste.
Yeah, something.
That is French.
Так, это плитка.
Now I see some kind of a card. Some kind of metal plate, actually.
Инструкция, как плитку
And some
складывать.
instructions about the metal plate. Okay, so apparently that's to set up a burner. Apparently a French or a British ration pack uses a Bunsen burner to cook up the food. I also see some kind of a chocolate mix.
Плитка, наверное, шоколада.
Actually, a chocolate bar.
Есть так. Это, скорее всего, да. Таблетки обеззараживающие. И спички.
Some matches.
Да, да. Так, а тоже сахар, да. Ну и все. Ну, так, немножко поярче, конечно, чем вот это вот, что нам предлагали.
Well, you see here that it says, it has a British flag on it, but it's also wrapped up and it says Palinitsi. Palinitsi. I don't know what that means. Let's see here what else. Appears that it has 2,500 calories in it, I'm assuming. And it also has written onto it something else. It says brother and then Slava Ukraini. So it looks like the British have made a very nice special little package here for what appears to be a hybrid blend of a French MRE and a British MRE. It's very interesting. Haven't seen anything like this
Ну и,
before.
конечно, nаш.
And the MRE review channels on YouTube are frothing at the mouth to try and get their hands on one of these things, most likely. But with that, that's the end of this video. And pretty interesting to see the MREs that the British and the French have been providing in unison to the Ukrainians. And so with that, we are moving on to our final clip, where we saw some Ukrainian high morale in action. Of course, morale has never dropped off, and the Ukrainians continue to set the standard for what high morale looks like. Of course, I can't play the music, but the video is entertaining in its own right. And so with that, that's the end of the video. Once again, a pretty funny one to see that the Ukrainians, of course, are just having a good time as usual. And it's always good to know that the soldiers aren't out there in just pure misery. And the Ukrainians have been in high spirits throughout the entirety of the war. And so with that, we're going to be moving out of the location unknowns, past Kharkiv, and on into the northeastern area near Lyman, where we saw today that the 44th Brigade destroyed some tanks. And I have to say, quite effectively, as it looked like a one-shot, one-hit. Well, except for the first shot. I forgot about that one. But I promise you guys, trust me, bro, the next one's going to hit dead on. Like that.
Nice.
The tank is now a bruise. You can see the fire already burning on it. And that's the end of the video. Great to see that the Ukrainians, the 44th Artillery Brigade, is still conducting that dead-on, precise accuracy that they've had since the start of the war. The first shot was close. The second shot never misses. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on into our next clip of the news in the northeastern Kharkiv area, which has largely been action inert today. We haven't gotten a lot of activity in this area, and it appears that the Ukrainians may have slowed or stopped their activity here to reorganize their forces and prepare them for whatever may come next. Moving on down to the area of Petropavlivka, however, we did see that Ukrainian forces hit another Russian tank today. All the news that we got from today is almost entirely about Russian tanks. And so here's a video of this thing getting turned into a fine, hot red fire. Also, notice how close that AT weapon was. It was right here in the video. Very close. And that AT man hit it dead on where you'd want to hit it, right on the front right wheel spoke. In case if you don't know, if you hit them at an angle somewhere in that area, it's supposed by public information that that area of the armor is weak enough that an AT weapon could punch through, any kind of AT weapon could punch through with ease. And we can see that he hit it just in the right spot. And now we can see another video showing you another tank being hit by an AT weapon somewhere on an open road. We can now see another tank being hit by a bomblet on the engine bay. which is not the best place for a bomblet to fall for as far as the Russians are concerned. And with that, that's the end of the video, and it looks like the Russians may be out 1, 2, or maybe even a third tank in this one video alone. Once again, credit to the Ukrainian brigade that conducted these actions. Unfortunately, we did not get the name of the brigade, but of course, best of luck to them, and they are setting the precedent for knocking out tanks in wholesale fashion. With that, we're now going to be moving on to our final segment of news for the night, which will include the entirety of the Donbass, the Southern Front, which is absent of news for the day, and the Kherson Front before we move on to the speech from President Zelenskyy. But before we get to all of this remaining news for the night, we are going to go through our second to last question segment, answering 3 questions from the chat, and also addressing the polls that have been sent in the meantime. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, folks, and it is now time for our second to last question segment of the stream, and we have 2 more polls to address. The first poll said, should Ukraine be rearmed with nuclear weapons? It looks like 47% said no, that would cause bad effects. 34% said yes, that would give them leverage. And 19% said, maybe. Now, for me, I would have to say that right now, if we were to rearm them with nuclear weapons, that might cause a really bad event with Russia, because that would give them all the excuse to finally launch nukes. If they already haven't decided to do so behind the scenes. So I would say wait to rearm them with weapons, nuclear weapons, after the war is over, but not right now. But Enforcer, what do you say?
I would say, and I know this may be a little bit of an unpopular take, but I would say not to rearm the Ukrainians with nuclear weapons. I would actually try and move in the direction of nuclear de-escalation worldwide. Maybe when the new Russian government comes into play, which will most likely happen within the next few years, maybe even within the next few months, we should try and see that could be the moment that we start to disarm almost all countries in the world of nuclear weapons the best we can. And when I say that with a lot of liberty. Nuclear weapons will never disappear off the face of this earth, ever again. Now that they've been brought into existence, Pandora's box has been opened and it will never be closed. Nuclear weapons will be around for all time. But one thing I would say is that countries should not have thousands of nuclear weapons like we see now. I believe they should only have a dozen, or maybe a few dozen. So that way, there are enough missiles that damage could be done, but the entire world over could not be set back decades in terms of technology and, hundreds of millions killed. And we could just largely remove nuclear weapons from the equation. I think that would be the best direction to go in. And if we gave weapons to Ukrainians in the future, during these hypothetical and highly assumed events that will occur, and we don't have any suggestion to say that they will, that would be another country that would have to be convinced, and they would have a very good reason for keeping nuclear weapons, that would have to be convinced to disarm themselves. And so I feel like for the long term, with the long-term plan that I would be looking at, that wouldn't be the best thing. But still, considering the situation, and if this was not to change and nuclear disarmament never happened, I would say that it may be beneficial to give them nuclear weapons at some point, or allow them the ability to rearm themselves or run their own nuclear weapons programs. And so with that, I hope that addresses the question fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next poll said, what do you think of the Humvee's gas mileage? It looks like 54% said it's fine, it's war, it works. 33% said that is awful, MPG, not good at all. And 13% said I don't really know. Now for me, I would have to say that, first of all, that's very bad miles per gallon. Not only does that decrease the amount of range the Humvee can go with the gas tank it has, that also means that Ukraine has to take on a lot more fuel to make it go that distance. So I have to say it is war and it works. It's better than nothing, certainly, but it would be really good if it had better miles per gallon for many reasons. But Enforcer, what do you say?
I would have to say, and this is an interesting take. I think that military doctrine should start heading in this way, is that vehicles should be as fuel efficient as possible. It cuts down on logistical burdens massively. Not getting into the political side of things, of whether you're, I guess you could say, an ecologist or, a green person or not. it makes a lot more sense cost efficiency wise and also logistically to try and make sure that a vehicle is fuel efficient as possible. To assume that every Humvee has to be filled with 25 gallons of gas to only travel 100 miles to 200 miles and then it has to be refueled with another 25 gallons is not only expensive when done on a large scale, but it's also inefficient, as you would require a larger amount of, I guess you could say, supply vehicles per Humvee or per group of Humvees than would be needed if they were far more fuel efficient. And so in that regard, I would have to say that it's certainly not a great miles per gallon. We'd have to compare that to other vehicles like what is the British equivalent of a Humvee? I believe it was a Land Rover. British Army Land Rover. It was, actually. This would have been the British Army's equivalent of a Land Rover. Well, of a Humvee, the Land Rover Wolf. So let's see if we can get some information on the Wolf. Now, the Wolf has an operational range of 510 kilometers, which is far further than 100 to 200 miles that the Humvee could do. But what is the miles per gallon on this thing? Also, it looks like the Land Rover Wolf has found a home in the German governmental agencies, according to this picture. And also, it looks nice. Yeah, I like that. I like that one. But let's see if we can get some Land Rover Wolf stats. Land Rover Wolf miles per gallon. 18 miles per gallon in the city or 22 miles per gallon on the highway. And so it has an incredibly good miles per gallon. That is putting
and also, Enforcer, I want to clarify one thing. When I say that I wish the Humvee were more efficient, I still think it should have a diesel engine, but surely there are more efficient diesels out there than the one they have in the Humvee with similar power.
And that's true. And it's a little bit of a tough problem to fix. And of course, I'm not an expert. Just as a disclaimer, I'm trying to do this off of a quick search right here. I'm not an expert on military vehicles much. But I would say that fuel efficiency should be the end goal, so that way you can cut down on the cost and also the logistical burden of trying to supply these vehicles with gas. Now, I actually saw Mark, the Orc Exsanguinator, say that a Humvee weighs about 4 tons or 8,000 pounds, and that is pretty heavy. If we look at our Land Rover Wolf, I believe, okay, apparently it won't give us the number here, but if we go over here, a Land Rover Wolf weight, we can see the Land Rover Wolf weighs only 1.6 tons. So far less heavier. It's about 40% as heavy as a Humvee, but it does get almost twice, if not 3 times, the range in normal conditions. So it does have its trade-offs, but at the same time, I do think that it would be in the best interest of the military to try and go for more fuel-efficient vehicles than the Humvee. And of course, the MRAP, with all of its armor and additional weight, is probably getting worse miles per gallon than the Humvee. Let's check and see. Wait a minute! 5 to 7 miles per gallon. The MRAP is getting as good, or even slightly better, miles per gallon than a Humvee. And look at an MRAP. If we look at a picture of an MRAP, this thing is bristling with weight. This thing is tons. Let's see how much it weighs, actually. MRAP weight. 14 to 18 tons.
And how much was a Humvee?
A Humvee was 4 tons.
Dang. So, yeah, definitely a better engine than this one.
Definitely. What kind of MRAP horsepower does it have? Let's see here. It's a 9.3 liter engine. So I'm assuming that... Oh, wait a minute. It's got 18.9 to 20 horsepower per American ton. But let's see the actual engine horsepower. Let's try and get an actual stat on that. 330 horsepower at 2100 RPM. So that's a fairly big engine. I mean, like 9.3 liters is getting on up there. And 375 horsepower, well, 330 horsepower is significant. And even then, it's getting as good or better gas mileage than a Humvee. And so in that regard, it's a good point, Mark, that it is the 4-ton, it's a 4-ton vehicle, and by no means is that light. But at the same time, an MRAP that is far heavier, almost, if we look at that, let's see, 4, 8, 12. I'm sorry, I'm having to do this on my hand. 4, 8, 12, 16. A MRAP can weigh almost 4 times the amount of weight that a Humvee is, yet it gets the same gas mileage as a Humvee, which says that the Humvee was just largely just dumping fuel, God knows where. I don't know how inefficient an engine can get to get that kind of gas mileage, but still, I do think that this is a pretty good step in the right direction. While it is as fuel efficient as a Humvee, which isn't great, it does add on a lot of crew protection and armor, which does, I guess you could say, cross that out and make it worthwhile. And so with that, I hope that addresses that poll fairly well. And we are now on to the questions.
All right, and moving into our super chat questions. Up first, we have a very generous $150 super chat from Mark, the ex-orc sanguinator, who says, H.R. McMaster said if they use nukes, the U.S. will devastate this conventionally. Black Sea Fleet sunk in 3 hours, Kerch Bridge, and invade Belarus. So many possibilities without using nukes.
And thank you so much for the massive amount of support, Mark. Of course, I just actually pointed out one of your live chats in the live chat section. And moving on from that, H.R. McMaster. I don't know who H.R. McMaster is, sadly. That's not a strike against him or anything. Unfortunately, I just don't have a lot of time to wander around and get to know people. But said if they use nukes, the U.S. will devastate this conventionally. Let's see here. Black Sea Fleet sunk in 3 hours. Honestly, that's not an impossibility. The U.S. military does have the technological means and also the ability to do something like that. The Kerch Bridge certainly would be a target of the United States, considering that we definitely have the cruise missile ability to target the bridge and hit it. That's not out of the question. We could also use stealth bombers with precision-guided bombs to get that job done as well. Invade Belarus. I would actually have to disagree with that one. I don't think that would be a good idea, because while Belarus has indirectly supported the Russians by allowing them to base forces on their land in the first 2 months of the war, it wouldn't be good to invade them, because it would almost be like drawing in what's almost been, for the large majority of the war, a neutral country into it. I think what would be better is to just invade Russia directly and race for St. Petersburg and hop on the M9 and just start going towards Moscow. But then again, that's just my opinion. The U.S. could have other plans. NATO could have other plans in general. And let's see, and so many possibilities without using nukes. And that is true. There are a lot of possibilities that the U.S. could do conventionally, along with the rest of NATO, that does not involve the use of nukes. But you've got to remember, the Russians at that point would be powerless to respond, especially if one of their shining examples of one of their fleets, the Black Sea Fleet, was destroyed in 3 hours. It would show how inept the Russian conventional army would be at handling that threat. And so the Russians would roll out the nukes most likely within the next few days or even the next few hours. And then, regardless of what we did conventionally, we would be drawn into the mutually assured destruction doctrine, where the Russians destroy us and we destroy them. And maybe Russia would destroy the rest of the Western world along with Europe. And then the rest of Europe, the ones that have nukes like the United Kingdom and France, would finish off the Russians. And so with that, and also I saw Turn Off Your Gaslight say Belarus is not neutral. That's true in a way, but at the same time, they're not directly involved in the fighting now. And so that sort of begs the question, would you be willing to start invading ground and land that hasn't been used for about the past 5 months for much of anything? And that's a pretty good question, in my opinion, to ask. And the answer would most likely be no, because think about it. Lukashenko would probably be ousted out of power anyways. You could save yourself the manpower and the time of having to try and march through Belarus to get to Russia. And at the same time, he may just switch sides, which really cuts out that whole entire dilemma. And then because he switched sides, there would be massive pressure on him. He would probably still step down, and you could avoid the bloodshed of having to try and take Belarusian territory at all. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the support, Mark. And those are some pretty good ideas and suggestions there. It does show that the United States has a myriad of things that it could do in the meantime. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
All right, and up next, we have a $20 super chat from Melanie Cortez, who says, Coffee Fund, Slava Ukraine, and pick a question from the chat, please. And Melanie, thank you very much for your contribution to the Coffee Fund. We do love our coffee, and we need it every single night to keep running, so thank you very much for that. And this live chat question is sponsored by Melanie Cortez, and it goes to YT, who says, have any UFC fighters been conscripted? A lot of them are from Dagestan. Any news regarding Russian UFC fighters dodging the draft?
Excellent question, and unfortunately, I haven't gotten any news on UFC fighters. Of course, I hate to say this, but as you all know, I'm largely out of the loop on the modern world. I don't really participate participate. I don't really watch a lot of sports, don't really get into a lot of modern pop culture, and so I'm kind of out of the know in a lot of those things. So unfortunately, I don't know of any UFC fighters, suffice it to say, at all, and I don't know of the ones that come from Dagestan or any news surrounding them. I'm sure there is some news out there like that, but unfortunately, on my end, I'm going to have to declare ignorance, as I haven't seen it or heard of it to be able to speak on it. And so with that, I'm sorry I can't really answer that question all too well, but thank you so much once again, Melanie Cortez. And of course, you'll always be remembered by me and Matthew as Mel Cortez. For some reason, that's just what I will always remember you for, but I thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. You've been around forever, and you've always been helping this channel to keep doing what it's been doing. And so thank you so much once again, and we are on to the next one, and I hope, although I wasn't able to answer that question, you did enjoy the response. And with that, we are on to, I believe, the final question of this segment.
Yes, indeed. And the final one of this segment goes to Gary Robbins, who puts in a $20 donation and says, would Ukraine be better off just cutting off Lyman and then moving on?
I believe that the Ukrainians would be, well, that's getting a lot into Ukrainian strategy, and I'm always scared of saying it because there's always the off chance, well, not really the off chance, there's a good chance that it could be correct, because if you look at historical trends and how militaries fight wars, they're almost the same. So I don't really want to say what I think the Ukrainians should do, but the besieging of Lyman is beneficial. Lyman is a major railroad hub in the area, and even if the Russians do inflict damage on it, it will help the front lines that have now moved all the way towards Svatove to be relieved logistically by the railroad side of, I guess you could say, the supply line. So in that regard, it is important for the Ukrainians to surround and besiege Lyman and take it like they are right now, and hopefully we'll be hearing of that news within the next few days. Also, someone said, dude, no one is using our strategies. I mean, maybe, that's true. But at the same time, there's been, and I don't mean to sound, and to address that one real quick before we move on out of this question segment. Whenever I say that, I don't mean to sound like I'm just all in the know and I have all the secret sauce and all that kind of stuff, and I know the walk and talk the talk and all. But at the same time, a lot of what I've said has ended up being what's happened. And so that puts me into the question, because believe it or not, we've had a lot of people watching these streams that I wouldn't believe watched. Like, we had Ronnie Fit from Funker 530, which is a 2.3 million subscriber channel. You would think that they wouldn't watch this channel, but yet they did. You would think that a lot of people don't watch this channel, but surprisingly enough, a lot of people do. And so I don't want to say anything definitive on my end, because what if that statement by me was something that the Russians had never considered before, and somehow it made it to them, and I ended up getting Ukrainian soldiers killed because I thought that I was too unimportant to be noticed. And that's a huge, huge liberty to take, and if that did happen, that would be terrible. So with that, that's why I don't state anything like that, even if I am not the biggest and most important in the world, and I don't know everything, which I don't. I don't want to be giving away anything, in my mind, that could end up getting people killed. That's not really a good way to live life, and of course, that kind of philosophy is why the saying goes, loose lips sink ships. It doesn't matter how unimportant you are. If you have loose lips and just say stuff that might get people killed, it probably will get people killed. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. I hope I was able to answer that question fairly well. And thank you so much for helping this channel to keep on running. And so with that, we are out of this question segment and on into our last segment of news for the night. And things only get crazier from here, as in the area of Lyman, we saw a wounded Russian get taken prisoner in the area of Lyman. This video, of course, was deleted, and so we will be moving on from Lyman, but as far as we know, the city is still under siege, and the Russian garrison will most likely not be holding out for too much longer. Moving on into the area of Bila Orivka, we did see that a drone guided in some artillery fire and was able to assist in knocking out some Russian vehicles, and also Russian positions. When you see the bright signature of a hot Russian vehicle or some soldiers inside of that tree line, and the artillery is now coming down dead on and inflicting a decent amount of damage on them. We can now see a small fire break out, and the artillery continues to rain down. And once again, all those artillery rounds are raining almost directly into that single tree line. And so with that, that's the end of the video. And it's great to see that the Ukrainian artillery, once again guided by that drone, was able to hit the Russian positions accurately. With that, we are going to be moving on into the next one. And real quick, I saw some people in the live chat, just to go back and address this again, saying things like, you know, yeah, blah, 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 you know, like, you think too highly of strategy and such things like that. But y'all got to, and I don't know, maybe some people haven't been around long enough, but back in the day, back when the Russians were the ones who were conducting the offensives in Ukraine, and Matthew was here for it, he can back me up, and a lot of people who are old guard members of this channel can tell you that when the Russians were the ones advancing through Ukraine, I would say, almost with exact precision, where exactly they would go, what roads they would take, and where they would end up by the next day. And surprisingly enough, within the next few days, they would be traveling down those exact same roads and taking those exact same villages. And Matthew can back me up in saying that way back then, you can go back and watch those streams, I would actually highlight a box showing the exact road they would go down and say why they would do it, and they would do it.
Indeed.
And so, for that reason, considering how accurate I was in predicting what the Russians did at the very start of the war, I don't want to be saying anything about what the Ukrainians will be doing in their offensives for that reason. It was far too close back then. It almost seemed like I was, at some times, because people were joking that I was in Russian war rooms and listening to what they were going to be doing the next day and then just telling everyone. That's why I don't want to say anything now, because what if I said something like, you know, and this is entirely fake, the Ukrainians are going to blow through Popasna and race towards Luhansk? What if I said that and that was correct? And what if someone was watching that mattered? That's something that I'm not going to do. I don't think highly of myself. I'm just here reporting the news. I know a little bit, but not everything. But I still don't want to be someone who sits there and says something that gets people killed, potentially. And so with that...
And just think, folks, why do y'all think that Ukraine wanted a media blackout for a while?
And also, one other thing. And I feel like people have been desensitized to this in a way, because a lot of people on YouTube do this. Well, not a lot. It's really only a small handful that we've seen. They will report the quote-unquote news, but they'll give away exact Ukrainian positions. Like, they'll be like, hey, guys, like, welcome to my video. We're going to look at the Ukrainians in Nizhny. They're actually in the street on the northern end of town in this video, and it looks like they're doing a great job. Go Ukraine, go Ukraine. And they're literally giving away these soldiers' exact positions almost within the hour. And I don't know if that started to desensitize people to operational security and how that works and making sure the Ukrainian soldiers stay safe, but that is not a way to report news. That just ends up getting people killed, and I guess it's just for the sake of views or something similar. But that's why we don't really go into that stuff all too much with the Ukrainians, is because if we have any part in saving a single Ukrainian soldier from being killed, we're going to make sure that we take that opportunity and not say anything about what's going on. And so with that, we are now going to be moving on into the next bit of news, where we saw a Ukrainian tanker go all out and charge the Russian tanks in this tree line. Now, let me explain this video real quick. We're watching drone footage from a Ukrainian drone. The two tanks we see here, and Matthew, you've got to watch this because I've never seen anything like it before. These two tanks we're looking at are Russian T-80 BVs. What we're about to see from the left side of the screen is a Ukrainian tank. The bravest Ukrainian tank in this war. When you see the Russian tank moving up again. And this is the bravest Ukrainian tanker on Earth. This is a Ukrainian tank that's charging the Russians. And you're about to watch this thing move into point-blank range and fire directly onto the front plate of that Russian tank and destroy it. I cannot believe this. I don't know how the Russian tankers did not see this Ukrainian tank, but this thing rolled straight up into the tree line, and then, bop, took it out. The Russian tank is now backing up. It was already reversing beforehand. It's most likely now out of control as overpressure has occurred in the cab, killing the crew. And the Ukrainian tanks are now, now this first tank was accompanied by a second Ukrainian tank. Now they are backing out of the tree line after conducting the closest tank-on-tank engagement in this war.
Enforcer, I'm being told in the live chat that it's the Russian tank that is running toward the Ukrainian tanks.
Are we sure about that?
That's at least what I'm hearing.
We see a white marking, but we got to remember at this point that both sides are using some kind of white marking, a cross or a Z, and it's hard to tell whether that's a Z or a cross. So let's go 1 second. I'm going to take this off screen and go down into the comments and read them real quick. Let's see here. Real quick, trying to read it. And it appears that on that specific instance, I'm going to have to eat my foot, as apparently that was a Russian tank.
Eat your foot?
Yes, eat my shoe, eat my foot, because apparently that was a Russian tank that took out a Ukrainian tank. And so, unfortunately...
Now, Enforcer, I was about to say, that tank charging the other two like that kind of seemed a little bit nuts to me, actually. It didn't really seem brave, it just seemed kind of crazy.
Yes, it did, and while I was thinking that was incredibly brave, apparently it was well, now it sounds like I'm changing the entire story, but apparently it was a Russian tank crew that knocked out a Ukrainian tank. But of course, while that tank was knocked out, it is pretty interesting to see tank-on-tank engagements occurring that close. And so with that, we're going to be moving on from that video, which now is taking a bit more of an unfortunate tone, and we're going to be moving further south to the area of Spernay, where we saw an Orlan 10 of the Russians conducting some kind of a surveillance mission, and we got a good look at what an Orlan 10 is doing in the area now. And so with that, we're going to mute this because it has copyrighted music, and we're going to take a look at what has been put up by the Russian Ministry of Defense.
There's that string again.
Yeah, there's the stupid catapult that they use. They're launching it like a Wright Brothers Wright Flyer. We now see them adding an additional add-on to the Orlan 10. Wait a minute. So now they're equipping Orlan 10s with bomblets. Some very crappy ones at that. They don't look that large. And now we can see apparently, what the hell is that? So now they're equipping Orlans with...
Is that an airbag?
It appears to be an airbag, and it's got a parachute as well. Huh. But with that, that's the end of the video, and an interesting look at an Orlan 10 that's now not being used for reconnaissance, but being used to drop the smallest bomblets on the battlefield. And so with that, we're going to be moving on into the next bit of news in the Donbass area, down near Svitlodarsk, where we saw a Russian tank get hit somewhere in the eastern area, somewhere in the area of Luhansk. Now, in this video, we are pretty sure that this is a Russian tank, unlike the last one where we apparently got the sides wrong. So here's a video of this Russian tank getting knocked out with some blasting music. We see the Russian tank slowly moving forward. It looks like it may have already had an artillery shell land near it, and the tank is still rolling forward incredibly slowly. Another artillery shell landed right by it again, a couple of yards off. The next one hit near the front. It looks like it's blown away the fender on the front of the tank and maybe caused some additional damage to the barrel, although we can't really tell, but the tank is now smoking. Oh! That thing was ripped apart like it was made of Legos. Look at all the little pieces go flying off.
No turret toss, though.
Oh, wait a minute. This right here is showing that video earlier that we showed in the location unknowns of the Russian tank being hit by a Ukrainian tank. And now we're seeing the video of the Ukrainian tank on a drone hitting that Russian tank. Nuts! That's cool. You actually got two perspectives of that Russian tank being destroyed. And so with that's seeing that video, and it's great to see that we actually saw where that location unknown video came from. And so with that, we're now going to be moving further down the front and into the direction of Avdiivka, where we saw that the artillery landed nearby some Ukrainian troops on film. And so with that, here's the video.
Roll away.
What type of music is that?
I didn't know what I was hearing there for a minute.
I didn't know what I was hearing either, but apparently it was a song. Well, I'm not going to unmute that to make sure.
No, definitely don't.
Yeah,
unmute
that was a
Definitely don't.
little questionable, to say the least. And I actually did not listen to this video with any audio at all, because I assumed it had music, and so I just threw it in and just watched the video muted. But I don't know if that was a song or not. But when you see the artillery landing nearby, then you now see them running through a field. And now it appears that they're on top of an APC and firing into the tree line for a second, although that may have just been a sporadic little hit of shrapnel. Yeah, we can actually see them firing right into the tree line alongside them. And we'll say they're being towed around the field by a BTR? I can't really tell for certain. We now see some artillery landing close nearby again, and the Ukrainians running down the field. Actually got a massive armored vehicles in this field. Ukrainians are moving by, firing off their AKs off the APC as they move along. You now see some kind of a shell flying across the field. Ooh, oh, that was close. Oh, goodness. Look at that. Ooh. Man. But with that, that's the end of the video. And we got to see some Ukrainian forces appearing to conduct some kind of an offensive, and also kind of coming under some artillery fire, and still bravely bearing through it and continuing on the offensive, although we haven't seen any ground taken in this area today. Moving on down to the direction of Pisky, we did see a retreating Russian convoy moving out of the area, being hit by the Ukrainian special forces as they continued to move down this dirt road. And so, here's the video. We can see the Russian convoy with pretty considerable spacing between them moving down the road. And we now see the first lead vehicle in the convoy being hit directly. And so with that, that's the end of the video, and it's nice to see that the lead vehicle is hit. Usually that causes some problems along the rest of the convoy. And with that, we're now going to be moving on out of the Donetsk area. And while we've seen some pretty interesting footage from this area, it does not suggest that either side has gained any ground. As far as we know, this front line is still stable as of today, and neither side has captured another village or pushed the other back. With that, we're now going to be moving from Donetsk and into our southern front, which is completely devoid of news, and the front line has not moved whatsoever. We're now going to be moving on into our next bit of news in the Kherson area, starting off in the northern area near Viskapilia, where we saw a destroyed T-62 in Kherson. Also, I like how that one person, Matthew, equated me saying I don't say things for OPSEC reasons, saying I have an ego. That's a pretty funny one.
Oh, yeah. Ignore the bots. Stugna.
Stukna. But with that, we can see a T-62, or the remnants of one, in a playground, apparently, that the Ukrainians have now liberated. We don't know where this village is, so unfortunately we weren't able to adjust the front lines. Also, more music. Luckily, it's not music like the last one. You see them continuing to walk along, and we see that this was clearly a school, and the Russians appear to have been basing forces out of it, which is not exactly the best of things to do. When you see another Russian tank, it appears to be a T-62 marked with Z. That was parked alongside the school, now abandoned. And we can see that other vehicle over there, some kind of a tank, that was destroyed quite clearly. Now I see, Matthew. You deleted the chat the
I'm
first time.
sorry, Joshua. I forgot to ban you, buddy.
I sat there and saw that, and I was like, you know, real quick, I think that's a funny one to address. I think everyone will get a good laugh out of this.
Nah.
No.
I wouldn't.
No, this is a good one. I like it. Someone, actually, Joshua Moore, specific person in the live chat, said, the Enforcer has a bad habit of being long-winded. I don't think they get the purposes of the show because the entire show is me reporting the news. So sorry if you don't enjoy the news, maybe you shouldn't have come to this channel, but of course it's a bot. But with that, we're going to be moving on from this video, and it's nice to see that the Ukrainians have liberated a village with a school in it, but of course it does show that the Russians once again were using schools as a base of military operations. Moving on into the next area, in the area of Novopetrivka, we were actually able to trace down this marker to an exact location. We saw the Ukrainians slamming the Russian forces with artillery. And so here's the video of that artillery coming down on the Russian forces in this row of houses. First artillery shell landed somewhere in the courtyard of a couple of the houses. It's now billowing smoke. It appears that they may have hit a vehicle. It looks like an APC is now on fire. Another artillery shell hit more towards the top of the screen on the tree line, but we don't know if Russian forces are basing in the tree line or in the village. We still see that APC burning. It appears to be a BMD-2. And so with that, that's the end of the video. And with that, it's nice to see that the Ukrainians did take out a BMD-2 in the area of Novopetrivka. With that, we're now going to be moving all the way down the front line towards the area of Davidiv Brid, where we saw an unfortunate video, but fortunate in a way, of a Ukrainian Su-24 being shot down. It appears that his surface-to-air missile hit near the rear of the aircraft, causing an engine to catch on fire. The crew tried to recover the aircraft, but once seeing it was unrecoverable, both of the crew members of this Su-24 ejected and survived, but of course the aircraft was shot down. Of course, we're going to have to mute this. But you can see the Su-24 flying through the sky, a ball of flame. The pilot still trying to manage the aircraft and see if it is recoverable. But here soon they'll see that it's no longer recoverable and they'll eject from the plane. Ukrainian aircraft have not been shot down in high numbers over the course of this war. This is a very rare instance of such a thing occurring. You can see the, I guess you could say the flare of the ejection seats firing from the plane and the pilots ejecting it appears to be sideways to the left of the plane. When you see another surface-to-air missile fired at the Su-24, but now it's completely devoid of pilots, and it's hurtling its way towards the ground, blowing up as another Russian clown fires a missile at it, as it's clearly in a dive straight for the ground. The Su-24, of course, was destroyed, but you got to give it to the brave Ukrainian pilots that have been flying these aircraft, massively outnumbered since the very beginning of the war, and striking at the Russians where they least expected, from the air. And so with that, that's the end of the video, and it's nice to see that the Ukrainians were able to eject. We don't see that a lot in Russian videos. Usually, we rarely ever see Russian pilots have a chance to eject from their aircraft, but in this one, we got to see that the Ukrainian pilots will hopefully have another lease at either flying an aircraft in the Ukrainian Air Force, or at escaping and making their way back to Ukrainian lines. With that, that's the end of that video, and we're going to be moving on to our final two bits of news today. Starting off near Pravdine, where we saw that the 36th Brigade hit some Russians with the 2S1, I don't know how to pronounce this, I'm very sorry, Gvodska? That's a butchering of pronunciation. I will not try again, but here's a Ukrainian SPG firing at the Russians. Credit to the 36th Naval Infantry Brigade for conducting this artillery strike. When you see the artillery raining down on the Russian positions in this tree line in the field. But we haven't seen any black smoke of death yet. We now see more explosions in the tree line, and I think they either are hitting infantry or something similar, as we're not seeing a lot of fires and explosions that are secondary, that do not come from the artillery itself. And so with that, that's the end of the video, and it's great to see that the Ukrainians are still pummeling the Russians in the southern Kherson area. With that, we're going to be moving on to our final bit of news in Mykolaiv, where we saw that a Shahed 136, of course, committed a kamikaze attack onto a civilian-populated area of the city. And so with that, here's the video of, once again, another unsolicited attack of terror that the Russians have committed on the Ukrainian public. We can hear the drone whirring above.
That's a strange noise. Wow.
And exploding in the distance. Honestly, it almost sounded like a very off air raid siren. And so that's the end of that video. Once again, another unsolicited attack by the Russians onto a civilian population in Mykolaiv. And with that, we have now covered all of the news from around the world today. And so, without further ado, we're going to be moving up to Kyiv to cover the speech from President Zelenskiy, which will wrap up our news segment here on day 219. And so, here is the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Українці, українки, ми продовжуємо нашу дипломатичну активність, спрямовану на те, щоб усі партнери України та держави світу розуміли, які нові кроки до ескалації робить цими днями держава-терорист. Говорив сьогодні з президентом Польщі Анджеєм Дудою і прем'єр-міністром Італії Маріо Драгі. Провів зустрічі з спікером Національної асамблеї Франції. Дякую партнерам за чітке засудження російських псевдореферендумів, за засудження спроби анексії нашої території, яка готується Кремлем зараз. Я дякую нашим польським братам за безцінну оборонну підтримку та нашу взаємодію заради спільної безпеки. І сьогодні в розмові з Анджеєм Дудою, з паном президентом, обговорили, як ми можемо ще зміцнити ці наші відносини. Обговорили також і транскордонну співпрацю. Маємо зробити все, щоб у наших народів не було жодної перешкоди для економічних та будь-яких інших відносин. Я хочу подякувати прем'єр-міністру Драгі за принципове засудження російських ескалаційних кроків. Ми обмінялися думками щодо того, які ще кроки у наших двосторонніх відносинах з Італією та у багатосторонніх відносинах на рівні Європейського Союзу можуть дати усім нам в Європі більше захисту. Перший в історії візит в Україну голови Нижньої палати парламенту Франції відбувається дійсно в історичний час. У час, коли солідарність між лідерами на всіх рівнях є визначальною для майбутнього демократичного світу. Я подякував пані спікеру Національних зборів Франції та її колегам-парламентарям за готовність і надалі допомагати нам боронити незалежність України і свободу усієї Європи. Поспілкувався сьогодні ж з університетською спільнотою і громадськими діячами Швейцарії на базі університету Цюріху. Дуже важливо, що Швейцарія та її громадяни не залишаються нейтральними, а підтримують наше прагнення жити вільно і у мирі. Всі у світі добре розуміють, що насправді означатиме така спроба анексії. Вона означатиме не те, на що сподіваються в Кремлі. Сегодня я объяснил это народам Кавказа, Сибири и другим коренным народам России. А теперь повторяю для всех в этой стране. Россия не получит новую территорию Украины. Россия присоединит себя к той катастрофе, которую она принесла на оккупированную территорию нашей страны. Россия приравняет себя к так называемым ДНР и ЛНР, окончательно добьет те институции нормальной государственности, которые в России еще оставались. Оккупант заполняет могилами захваченную территорию Украины. И все больше могил на территории самой России. Оккупант устраивает на захваченной территории пыточные и заполнит пыточными всю территорию России. Только так теперь будет работать российская полиция, российские спецслужбы. Закон в России уничтожен. И те, кто принес все эти смерти, издевательства, изнасилования из России, унесут их их к себе домой. Оккупант уничтожает везде, на захваченной территории, любые основы для жизни. Экономику, социальную сферу, культуру. Ценой того, что один человек в России хочет продолжать эту войну, будет то, что все российское общество останется без нормальной экономики, без достойной жизни, без уважения к каким-либо человеческим ценностям. Это еще можно остановить. Но чтобы это остановить, придется остановить того одного в России, кто хочет войны больше, чем жизни. Вашей жизни, граждане Росії. Сьогодні російська армія нанесла чергові підлі удари по мирним людям в Миколаєві. Снаряд розірвався біля зупинки громадського транспорту. Є загиблі, є поранення. Знову обстріли Харкова, Сумщини, жорстокий вогонь на Донбасі, на півдні України. Все це можна зупинити тільки одним шляхом – визволити. І поки Росія не прийшла всюди, на українській землі, було нормальне життя. І коли Росія піде, коли ми її витиснемо, нормальне життя повернеться. І це єдиний шлях. Це шлях до нашої перемоги. Не можемо знати, скільки часу потрібно, щоб пройти цим шляхом, але знаємо, що жодна російська маніпуляція і жоден російський злочин не здатні зіштовхнути нас з цього шляху. Сьогодні вдалося забезпечити звільнення ще 6 наших громадян з російського полону. Я дякую всім, хто забезпечує цю роботу. Сьогодні маємо нові результати на передовій. Сьогодні отримали додаткові елементи допомоги від партнерів. Так буде і надалі. Завтра ще один день нашої боротьби. Ще один день на шляху до перемоги. Чи буде він особливий для нас? Цей день стане ще одним, який наблизить нас до безпеки і миру, до відновлення нашої територіальної цілісності, бо заради цього воюють і працюють мільйони українців. Завтра відбудеться спеціальне засідання РНБО, яке я скликав. Будуть рішення. І ми знаємо, як реагувати на будь-які російські дії. І наостанок. Сьогодні вранці я вшанував пам'ять усіх жертв розстрілів у Бабиному Яру. Вічна пам'ять жертвам нацизму. Вічне прокляття тим, хто повторює злочини нацистів. Слава Україні!
And with that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky, and that also wraps up our news segment here on day 219 of the war of Ukraine, and the first day of a brand new week. I thank you all so much for watching, and if you are new to this channel and you did enjoy tonight's stream and the news, please make sure to subscribe, as these streams run daily, every single day of the week, at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, covering the past 24 hours of the war, all the video and picture evidence that we have been able to find. And so with that, I thank every single one of y'all so much for watching, and we're now about to move on into the question segment, where we're going to answer all of the super chats and as many live chats as we can get to. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, folks, and for our final question segment of the night, we have one poll to address. I know that's kind of disappointing, but we only have one poll, and the question is pretty simple. Do you like Zelenskyy's hoodie? It looks like 91% said yes, it is so comfy looking, and 9% said no, it looks all right. Now for me, I have to say that's a pretty cool hoodie. I like the simplicity of the design of it as well. But what do you think, Enforcer?
I would have to say it is pretty cool. No one can deny that that is a sick-looking hoodie that is very stylish and nice-looking. But surprisingly enough, I've seen a lot of people at the same time, while saying it does look comfy and nice, a lot of people have been saying, I'm not a Ukrainian, so I don't know if I could get that hoodie and wear it or not. And I've seen an opportunity here, and I think we'll have to jump on it real quick, Matthew. It is time for a merciless plug. Actually, real quick, I will show this to y'all. So we are going to drag this over to my screen. Look at that. It's on my screen. This is my stream. And for some reason, there was no audio playing in it, which was kind of odd, but hey, we don't judge. Anyways, this is our stream. And if you want a fashionable hoodie that wears quite well, in fact, I have one of my own, you can go down into the description below to the merch store, which is the first link in the description. Click on it, and you are greeted with the enforcerstore.com, which is our channel's merch store. If you would like to support the channel, but you're not really a big fan of super chats, and you would like to get something tangible in return, like clothing, we have a line of Enforcer merch products with the Enforcer on it, and also some Lee Spring Army merch that we made permanent store items. The Honey Badger will probably be returning at some point as a permanent SKU. However, we have not figured out the design that we'll be doing with that one to make it a permanent item. But still, it is really cool. And if you would like to support our channel and get a hoodie similar to it, you could get a Lee Spring Army hoodie. They do come in a variety of colors, which I'll show you all here real quick. It comes in navy blue. It comes in black. It comes in dark heather. It comes in Carolina blue. It also comes in charcoal, light pink, forest green, and sport gray. So if you would like, please make sure to get a hoodie. It does support the channel. And of course, you look pretty stylish and also support the Lee Spring Army. And so with that, I hope you all have enjoyed that quick little merciless plug, and we are on into the questions. And I would have to agree that Zelenskiy's hoodie did look pretty good, and I hope you all found that merciless plug well placed. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. So we're moving on to our super chat questions. And first up, we have a $50 donation from Anthony, who says, did you hear that 2 people from Maryland got arrested for trying to pass military medical documents to Russian government? One of them was a major in the U.S. Army. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, buddy. What are my thoughts on that? Well, to make it short and sweet, anyone in the United States military that voluntarily and willingly tries to give sensitive information to a foreign power is committing treason. And the act of treason should bring the highest punishments that one can get. For that specific reason, I would say life in prison would be quite fair. If it was giving away information that could end up getting people killed, I would say that of course, this is a little bit of a stretch because this one is a little touchy, but in terms of national security and potentially getting people killed, and considering that this is something you can do in the United States, I would advocate the death penalty. Things like that, committing treason, is a serious crime that could lead to the collapse of the country if many people started to conduct it and it wasn't punished severely. And so for that reason, I would have to say that that major should be facing serious punishment, most likely since it's just medical records and it's not going to be getting anyone killed in an active battlefield. I would say life in prison would be quite fair. And so with that, I hope that addresses the end part of that comment fairly well. But the first part, I actually didn't know about that today. That's something new to me. But one thing that a lot of people, I don't think, know is that while the U.S. military is one of the top in the world, like every organization in the world is not without fault, not without their bad eggs. And the U.S. military we will have the occasional bad egg crop up, like we've seen right here. But the benefit of being in the United States is that for the most part, the large majority of these bad eggs get knocked out pretty quickly, like we've seen here. And hopefully we'll be able to keep on the ball and make sure that all of these bad eggs face the drums at one point or another. And so with that, I thank you so much.
Now,
go ahead.
Enforcer, real quick on that question. Something that comes to mind when I hear military medical documents, I wonder why they'd be wanting to pass it off to the Russians.
That's interesting, and it kind of does beg the question as whose medical documents were those?
And, honestly, it kind of makes me think that maybe they want that for maybe biological weapons reasons, potentially.
I don't know a lot about biological weapons, but I think, for the most part, biological weapons have not made it to the technological degree that they could attack specific groups of people. It would kind of just spread to the entire world. Like a virus. But I could be wrong. If we have any experts in the chat that kind of pertain to that field, let us know if that is possible or not, because I'm not entirely sure. But it is kind of odd that they were handing over medical documents. And I would have to say that the high punishments are deserving of handing over sensitive information as an official or an officer specifically in the United States Army. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and I hope that addressed the comment fairly well, Anthony, and thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running.
All right, and up next, we have a $40 super chat from Tom Kelly, who says, Enforcer, here is some coffee money. I recommend Death Wish coffee.
Goodness.
And man, is that a name for coffee, man?
That is a name for coffee. I thank you for the support. I thank you for helping us out with the coffee fund too. But Death Wish coffee? I don't think I want to die. To be honest with you. I'll give it a try, but Death Wish sounds pretty ominous. Let's pull it up. Death Wish coffee. Also, real quick, man, can we get a head count on how many super chats we have?
Let's see. We currently have about 30 or so.
Oh, so not that many, but of course we'll probably start to try and answer them, and then in 30 minutes we'll still have 30. But we'll see. Death Wish. Well, the branding looks pretty ominous. And I think y'all may have gotten this at this point, but I'm not really one for the ominous.
They call them Death Cups.
Death Cups. Let's see. The world's strongest coffee, always sourced from the highest quality beans, ruining other coffee since 2012. Well, I'm telling you this. If they can beat Busy Nitro Cold Brew in the absolute putrid flavor, then it is a Death Wish. But I would have to look at this. It's ominous looking, but perhaps the branding is up to spec, and this stuff is the strongest coffee in the world. How many milligrams? How many milligrams of caffeine in a cup of Death Wish coffee? It's like Google knew I would. 472 milligrams in 8 ounces? God! How many, how much?
That's crazy.
How many milligrams of caffeine in a Busy Nitro Cold?
200.
200. Let's see. 48.2 megagrams of caffeine per fluid ounce. So real quick, let me do the math on that for an 8-ounce cup. So 46.2 times 8. So this, so Busy Nitro Cold Brew has 369 milligrams for an 8-ounce cup. And that's about what I drink nightly to run this stream. This almost has 500 milligrams. I would probably defer from drinking this because I would be dead if I tried to drink it. My heart would explode. But I do thank you for the support. That is a crazy coffee. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
All right. And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Larry Weaver, who does not leave a comment. But Larry, thank you very much for the support. And we do appreciate you helping to keep us running. So thank you very much for that. And moving on, we have a $20 super chat from SuperBonker9000, who says, how does one know when Russia is honest? His lips are closed. Please take a question from the live chat and Slav Ukraine. And Enforcer, would you like to take that one real quick?
Yes, I thank you so much for the support, SuperBonker9000. And once again, a play on a classic joke. And so with that, we will honor the request and make sure to answer a question from the live chat. And so what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and this question is sponsored by NAFO, and specifically SuperBonker9000. And the question goes to, let's see here. What else happened? Who says, do you really think these media people believe the BS that they are feeding their audience?
What else happened? Do you believe? I think you're talking about the Russian propagandist clip that we showed in our Russian news segment. I think that these Russian propagandists, there really is no direction for reason for them to be going in the direction they are right now, almost seeming to be disillusioned and anti-war, because that only puts them at odds with the central government. And so with that in mind, I would have to say, I think they do believe what they're saying to the Russian public there, because why else would they be saying it? That they're kind of putting themselves at risk at this point by saying those things. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. I know it's not too good of an answer. Sadly, I can't really formulate a great one off the top of my head for it. But I hope that answered the question fairly well. And thank you so much for sponsoring a live chat question, SuperBonker9000. That was incredibly kind of you. And of course, it's been a nice habit that was started off by who? I'm trying to remember who. I think it was Tangen Brigeri, if I'm correct.
I think so. I can't remember for certain.
And unfortunately, I can't remember who it was. I think two people did it on the same night, almost at the same time. So I can't remember which one of y'all it was, but I think Tangen was one of them. So thank you to the two of y'all who started off this wonderful little trend, because it allows for live chat questions to be answered before we get to that segment. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again.
All right, and up next we have a $30 super chat from Blue Flam 777, who says John Lennon drank 20 to 40 cups of coffee per day.
Is that what killed him? The silence has now come over the room. It's that joke. Matthew's like, oh God. But
is it okay to laugh at that?
Yeah, I think it's okay to laugh at that. It happened like, what, 50 or 60 years ago at this point? I think it's okay. Most people aren't.
I was about to say something, but I held it back.
Well, let's hear it. I think a little bit of
No, I can't say that on the stream.
All right. I'll take your word for it.
Yes, you better.
And a whole bunch of people are now starting to laugh at that in the live chat. People are like, "Oh my God!" I'm glad y'all enjoyed it though. But moving on from that, someone said lead poisoning. Well, I don't think coffee has lead in it. We'll have to look into the cause of death a little bit better. But I thank you for the support, Blue Flame 777. And John Lennon. Let's just say the average cup of coffee has 80 to 90 milligrams in it. We'll go with 85 as a round number, times 20 on the low end. That man was drinking 1,700 milligrams of caffeine a day. That's a caffeine junkie right there. He might as well be taking heroin or meth at that point. And so with that, I thank you for the support, Blue Flame 777. And I don't think I'd want to go in the route of John Lennon, because if you look at him, he's dead and I'm alive, and I don't want to end up like him for drinking that kind of coffee. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again, Blue Flam 777, for the support. And also, real quick, just to dispel this, I do know what happened to John Lennon. That's the joke. So with that, we are on to the next one.
And also, to answer Derek's question, sadly, we use a company called Teespring on our merch, and they control the sizing of our merch. So sadly, I cannot get you a 4X. I would love to be able to get that for you, but sadly, we can't. Maybe one day they'll change it, because I've always been wondering why they don't offer more smaller and larger sizes. But sadly, we can't at the moment. But anyways, moving on to our next super chat, we have a $20 donation from BSG Wolf, who says, how do you think the Russian Federation will break up, and in what kind of time frame?
I think that the Russian Federation will most likely break up within the next 4 months or in the next several years. The reason being is that it's not going to be immediate. We can see that the civil motivators are in function. They are on the move. Historically, this is where it starts. However, we have to wait for the military to start moving against the government, and then that's when an overthrow will occur. If the Russians go through another dissolution like they did during Soviet times, I guess you could say the more so Islamic regions of Russia, much like Chechnya and Dagestan, will break away. That will be inevitable. Other areas, it's very hard to say. Crimea and most of Ukraine, well, all of Ukraine, will most likely be reabsorbed back by the Ukrainians, back to their pre-2014 borders. And I just can't really see the Russians breaking up further from there. It's just really hard. It's just really hard to see that, because a lot of Russia is now economically dependent on Moscow for its survival, in a way, due to how the funding has been set up there. And so if they try and break away, like if Siberia tried to become an autonomous country of their own, as sovereign nation, while they have the raw materials and production in that regard, they don't really have anything else. And I know that a lot of countries have made it on raw production alone. The United Arab Emirates is an example of that. But Siberia, on the other hand, it's just really hard to say whether if they would be better off that way or not. And you got to remember that even if they did break away from Russia and Siberia did become an autonomous country, they would still border Russia, most likely on both ends, because I don't really see the area of Vladivostok or the Far East breaking away all too much, considering it's almost uninhabited. And in that regard, they would still most likely be surrounded by Russia, or if they only had Russia on one side, the Russians would be their major transport corridor to the rest of the world, and so they would still have to operate through the Russians, and then if there was another alternative, they would have to operate through the Chinese. And so I just don't really see them breaking away from the Russians. The only places I could see in good grasp domestically inside of Russia, not speaking about Georgia or anywhere else, I would have to say that really the only places I could see breaking away for certain are Grozny and, well, not Grozny, Chechnya. I was reading the capital name for some reason. Chechnya and Dagestan. And so with that, I hope that addresses the comment fairly well. And thank you so much for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a $20 super chat from Carson Larimore, who says, I'm willing to bet once Lyman is liberated that they will find more grave sites of tortured Ukrainians.
That is probably true. The Russians have been torturing Ukrainian citizens every single place that the Ukrainians have liberated, and so it is safe to assume that there will be mass graves somewhere in the area of Lyman of the remains of what the Russians have done to the Ukrainians that were there. And so with that, I hope that addresses the comment fairly well. It's a bit of a sad topic and an unfortunate reality of what's been occurring in this war, and hopefully the Ukrainians are able to find the Russians who committed these crimes and hold them accountable. Although at this point, the number of accountable people who've been doing this is most likely ranging in the multiple thousands to tens of thousands, considering how many war crimes we've seen on the basic soldier to civilian level. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again, and I hope I addressed that comment fairly well.
All right, and up next, we have a $20 super chat from Justice Ryan, who says, Enforcer, once the 300,000 conscripts are taken out, how long will it take, and how many soldiers can Putin raise from the mandatory nationwide call-up if it ever happens?
And can you reread that one again, just to make sure I get it correct?
Enforcer, once the 300,000 conscripts are taken out, how long will it take, and how many soldiers can Putin raise from the mandatory nationwide call-up if it ever happens?
The mandatory national call-up can happen, like you've said, but at the same time, it most likely will never happen. The Russians don't have the supplies to be able to field these soldiers. Like we can already see, the partial mobilization of 300,000 men is being poorly equipped and supplied already. And this is most likely in the far reaches of what the Russian military is now capable of fielding. And so trying to do a complete mobilization of the country will most likely result in nothing. So of course, there is always the counter to that statement that the Russians could just produce more equipment to field these soldiers with. However, they don't have the ability to do that, to make that story short. And so in that regard, if the Russians did run out of these 300,000 conscripts and their situation in Ukraine was completely lost, available Russian reserves. Let's see what we got. Oh, so it looks like the percentage of gold in the international... I don't know why I pulled that up. Available Russian military reserves. Let's pull that up. How many reservists does Russia have? About 2 million. Wow, that's it? 2 million? Hang on. Let's do the math. So, 2 million reservists, 300,000. 300,000 divided by 2 million. So right now, they've already raised 15% of their entire reservist force in the single mobilization. So going off of that, they could raise about another 1.7 million. But whether they could actually field them and supply them is a whole other question. The answer to that would be no. We're already seeing that they're not able to supply the conscripts. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the support. And a pretty good question. That was a really good one. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $15 super chat from Dadgood, who says, Enforcer, with all the Russians running to other countries, what's stopping Putin from trying to annex those countries with the same excuse? For example, to protect the Russians there.
The reason why they can't do that is because a lot of the countries they're fleeing to are countries like Georgia and Kazakhstan, which, while Georgia isn't exactly friendly to Russia, it is somewhat indifferent to them. Also, Kazakhstan is, by and large, slightly friendly, not the most friendly, not the warmest of people to the Russians, but they are slightly friendly. And also another thing that's stopping them from doing this is that they lack the ability. They can't even fight a war in Ukraine. They're losing this one right now. And so imagine if they tried, with the condition of the Russian forces that are now being raised, if they tried to start an offensive war in Kazakhstan or Georgia. That certainly would not add any kind of lesser problems to these countries that these Russians are fleeing to. And the Russians just really couldn't follow it through. And I would have to say that would be my best answer as to why they haven't done that. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does answer the question in a short but fairly good way. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
And next up, we have a $15 super chat from Barrett Jex, who says, I love you all in the chat, and also to our host channel, along with the Leaf Spring Army, Enforcer, and Matt. Bless you both for your dedication to the major global situation and peace.
And thank you so much for the support. It helps out this channel a lot, and I thank you so much for all the kind words, especially to everyone in the live chat. I don't feel like the live chat gets enough credit in super chats often, but y'all are an incredible group. Really fun to talk to, have some interesting points, and of course, the bad eggs that come through, Matthew gets rid of them pretty quickly, so we keep it pretty civil in here, and of course, very interesting. So I thank you all so much for watching, and of course, like he said, y'all are an incredible group. And so thank you so much for the kind words to us and the entirety of the Leaf Spring Army in the live chat. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support and all those kind words.
And moving right along, we have a $15 super chat from Tangan once again, who does not leave a comment this time. But Tangan, thank you very much for being here for a very long time and still supporting the channel even to this day. So thank you very much. And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Phil Shepins, who says, how do you know so much about military equipment? Were you in Army before?
Oh, excellent question. No, I was not. And thank you for the support. I know a lot about equipment because I just grew up focusing on it a little bit too much. I really don't know how to explain how I did it. I would say that a great contributor to my knowledge on military vehicles and identifying them quickly comes from reading books. Now, I do play a game called War Thunder, which has an extensive library of thousands of vehicles that have been used from the pre-Second World War period up to the present day. It's very large. I think around 1,600 to 1,800 vehicles at this point. And that game helped a little, but reading books really helped out a lot more because, you know, if you know anything, War Thunder way back in the day when I was really into this and identifying vehicles and learning about them, they didn't have a lot of the vehicles they have now. They're constantly adding new ones. And so I would go and look at something like read a book. I would say, actually, real quick, I'm going to show y'all a website that will really help y'all out a lot in just getting a quick little read, a quick little update. I would say that this is very similar to the Congressional Research Service, the CRS, that you can pull up online and read. This is Osprey Publishing. I'm not sponsored by them. I'm not sponsored by anyone. But if anyone makes good short books on a lot of stuff that is well researched, it would be Osprey Publishing. They have some pretty high standards. And if you want to find one of the books I read specifically about the Russian Federation and their condition that they're in now, let me type this in. Russia. Type that. Press enter. It takes a little bit for it to search. And they do make some fantasy books and things like that, but they have an extensive library of, I guess you could say, historical books. We can see here a whole load of them. And I'm trying to find y'all the one on the Russian Federation. We can also see a book. These are all short. They're around 75 to 100 pages long, sometimes even closer to 50. But they give you a brief little synopsis and story about each little topic. And it's very well researched. It gets all the major points across without getting too much into the weeds, so you can get a pretty good understanding of things. I'm trying to find the specific one. Maybe if I type in Russian Federation, that'll get us the answer quicker. Russian Federation. Or, as the Russians call it, Rossiyskiy Federatsy. And, real quick, we are trying to speed this up, Matthew, but the search engine is going slow. Sorry about that. Trying to scroll down and find this stuff quickly. God, I can't find it quickly, can I, when I need it? Anyways, these books do give you some pretty brief descriptions about everything, and I've used Osprey's books to learn a whole myriad of it. Also, this is one of the books I actually did read, Armies of Russia's War in Ukraine, but they give you a whole load of information. I've been using these smaller, easier to read books that are still very well detailed to learn about Western militaries, and I guess you could say Western history from the 1600s up to the present day, which gives you a pretty good idea of how the modern world works and how it's been unfolding. So with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Augustin Lara, who says, I started watching about 6 or 8 days before all the craziness with the moderators. I don't know if I'm old guard or not, but Slava the Enforcer in Ukraine.
And thank you so much for the support, and believe it or not, that qualifies you as old guard. The Great Schism occurred a long time ago. a long time ago. And of course, it makes you an old guard member to be around for that long, because I think that would have happened about 180 days ago at this point. And so, you are an old guard member, and thank you so much for supporting this channel and helping us to keep on running. And so, I gotta thank you so much. Also, Slava the LSA, thank you to everyone who's been around for that long. It's been quite a journey. We faced a lot of challenges, and we're still here. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from BL Parak, who says, in many foreign countries, a passport is their primary identification, similar to a driver's license in the United States.
And I thank you for the support, and I was going to say that earlier, and I would have to say that that's a very true statement. Maybe that's the continuation, the modern version of show us your papers that they used to say in the Soviet Union, and the Russian Federation just continued that on with the passport. In fact, I don't know if the papers back then were a passport or not. I feel like they most likely, logically, would have been. And so with that, I thank you so much for the little bit of information there. Glad you added that in, because I was thinking that a little bit earlier, and you, of course, clarified it. So thank you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, big shout out to Junebug72 for putting in a $10 super chat, but without a comment. But Junebug72 is a long-time channel viewer, a very long-time channel viewer, and we appreciate it very much, Junebug, and thank you for the support once again. And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Rob Bertram, who says, Enforcer Matt, can I get a yeehaw?
And it sounds like you did. I don't really have to answer that one too much. But I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Kyle, who says, do you think the Russians used a bomb on a pig to blow the Nord Stream pipeline? A pig is a robot that travels in the pipe.
A pig, Nord Stream pipe.
Make sure not to pull up that pig picture again.
Yeah, let me actually take this over to another screen now that you said that. Internal trunk. Oh, yes. The pig. The pig is not an animal. It's also not anything else. It is just some kind of a tube boring machine, it appears. It's not really boring. I guess it's more so of a tube traveling machine. The pig could have been used to blow it up. It could have been, but I don't really know a lot about it. And so I have to declare ignorance on this, but I think that would be about as good a guess as any as to how the explosive was delivered down the pipe. And so with that, I hope that answers the question, or addresses the comment fairly well. And also a pretty smart assumption there. I feel like it would be a logical guess. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right. And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Americo, who says, it appears that you missed the video, who some guest calls our favorite Russian propagandist, afraid of woman.
Read that again?
Americo says, it appears that you missed the video, who some guest calls our favorite Russian propagandist, afraid of woman.
I have not seen that video, and I will try and find it, but unfortunately, I think we did miss that on tonight's stream, and so we will go on the search for it, I promise you, and thank you so much for the support, and with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from KG, who says, HMMV's engines are diesels and super simple, easy to work on diesels. They could turbocharge, but there are thousands of Hummers, and they need dead simple engines to work on for the motor pools.
And can you reread that one again? I'm sorry to ask this about for the third time in a row, but can you read that again?
Yeah, KG says, HMMV's engines are diesels and super simple, easy to work on diesels. They could turbocharge, but there are thousands of Hummers, and they need dead simple engines to work on the motor pools.
And that is a pretty good point, and that may be the reason why it's a little bit fuel inefficient. But, you know, it's still incredibly fuel inefficient, especially for the weight of the vehicle when compared to an MRAP. But still a pretty good point, and they may have weighed out the logistical probabilities that leads to, or the logistical problems is a better word for that. And they decided that mechanical simplicity was far more important than the logistical side of things, considering that the United States has that down incredibly well. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and thank you so much once again for the support, and also the comment and the information. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Victor Luna, who says, will Ukraine become a superpower after the war? Ooh, I don't know about that, Victor.
Ukraine will be a regional power after the war, but it will not become a superpower. To become a superpower, you have to have the ability to project military forces around the globe. To be a world power, you have to be able to project military forces around the globe, but not really as well, if you see what I'm saying. The United States is a superpower because we have one of the largest militaries in the world, we have the largest economy in the world, and we have hundreds of bases that are checkered across the entire world. Wherever you see land, there is an American base, most likely somewhere, except for France and China, and also India. And also a couple of other countries, but by and large, there is an American base everywhere, and for that reason, we are a superpower. The Ukrainians most likely would never get to that point because they would probably never get the ability to have military bases in foreign countries and the base forces there, and they most likely will never have the economic power to have the military ability to be able to send forces around the world whenever, wherever, and at any size. And so, unfortunately, they will not become one, but I do think that they will definitely enjoy economic prosperity after the war, and most likely a heightened status compared to what they had pre-war. And so with that, I hope that does address the question fairly well, and thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Terrace Kuluk. Kulik, I think. Sorry, Terrace, I think I mispronounced that last name again. He says, was going to stop to the local watering hole for a couple of beers, but decided to watch the Enforcer stream instead. My liver thanks you.
And I thank you so much for the support. I'm glad you didn't go, well, it doesn't really matter to me if you went to a bar or not. You could have had a fun time either way, but I'm glad that you're having a fun time with us tonight, because, of course, I love to know that people are getting their daily news. And so,
unfortunately, he said the watering hole.
Yeah, the watering hole's a bar, Matthew.
I know. I was trying to mess with you.
I thought you were being serious. I was like, what? You didn't know?
No.
But with that, I thank you for the support, and also I'm glad that you are watching tonight's stream. So thank you so much once again. Glad you didn't destroy your liver. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much. And here we go on into the next one.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Sick Lid, who says 18-year-old men on both sides are performing incredibly brave acts on a daily basis. Now, Sick Lid, I have to say, first off, thank you for the support, but I have to disagree with you. There's nothing brave about what the Russian soldiers are doing. They're simply being either coerced to fight, or they're over there fighting for a government that is inherently wrong in what they're doing. So I don't see any bravery on the Russian side, but I would say the Ukrainians are extremely brave for standing up for their country.
Yes, I would say that the Ukrainians have been extremely brave. I wouldn't really call the Russians brave because they are committing war crimes on an unbelievable scale. And that would be like saying, and I'm not trying to rat on the comment or anything. I'm just saying that on my perspective, that would be like saying both the Americans and the Germans in World War II were incredibly brave and heroic, and I don't really think anyone would want to make that statement about the Germans. And so with that, I can't really say that the other side is brave, but I can assure you that the Ukrainians are certainly some of the bravest we've ever seen. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope I addressed that fairly well. And also, I saw this. This was an interesting comment, considering that this is about the superpower question earlier. Some of my viewers have suggested that some countries have been burned to the ground in the Second World War and came back as world powers. Great point. But the thing is that if you look at the Second World War and the largest economies in the world at the time, GDP by country, 1940. List of countries by largest historical GDP. Hopefully this shows 1940. Let's see here. Let's scroll down. Unfortunately, this doesn't go back to 1940. Hopefully this shows it. Here we go. This is in billions of dollars from 1938 to 1945. So we can see here that the United States, even back then, was a major economic power, with $800 billion a year being our GDP. The United Kingdom was also a rather large one, but if we scroll down a fairly good bit, we can see that Germany was actually rivaling the entire Soviet Union at that time, and Japan was on an economic level comparable to France, which at that point had a massive sprawling global empire. And so in those regards, the Japanese and the Germans, if you don't know their economic standing before the war really kicked off, they would appear to have become like a burning phoenix and to have risen out of the ashes as a brand new world power. But the truth is that before the war, they were already some of the largest economic powers in their time. And so with that, I hope that addresses that fairly well, because good point that they did recover, and they are some of the largest economies in the world at this point. But even then, they were incredibly large, big enough to rival some of the largest European powers and some of the largest world powers at the time. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next we have a $50 super chat from Rob Bertram, who says, "You know what I notice about the LSA community? Sometimes we might crack on someone about something they've said, but we all mostly realize we're here for a common cause and kiss and make up when appropriate. Slava LSA and Slava Ukraine."
Well, thank you so much for the support, Rob Bertrand. And I would have to say that it is pretty normal for everyone in the live chat, of course myself included, to kiss and of course make up when appropriate. I think Matthew may have picked up on the voice I did there for just literally 1 second.
Yes.
But I think it is great that the Lee Spring Army is a incredibly good and forgiving group of people, and that's one thing that we try and make sure to curate as we keep on going, because at the beginning of this channel, I could make a mistake. Someone would politely say, "Hey, I think that may be wrong. Maybe you want to check your information on that real quick." And I'd check it, and I'd be wrong, and I'd correct it. But every once in a while, we'll have a wave of new people come in, and I guess, I don't know where they come from, but they feel like they can't ever say things politely and that nothing can be forgiven. And so they'll be like, "Oh, you idiot, you're so stupid," and then they'll treat other people like that in the live chat if they get something wrong in their head. And it's good to know that we continue to keep our community where everyone is forgiving. I don't ever bear down on someone for their mistakes, and hopefully everyone understands that everyone does make mistakes. Hopefully we correct ours on stream and get the information correct before we move on. But with that, I thank you so much for the support, Rob Bertram, and I would have to say that that's a very good attribute of the Lee Spring Army, is that a lot of people are reasonable here. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support, and we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Kent Hoover, who says, "Do you think peacekeepers will be used at some point in the future in the occupied areas?"
I think... Can you reread that one again?
Do you think peacekeepers will be used at some point in the future in the occupied areas?
By the Russians? Maybe. By the Ukrainians? Probably not, because, believe it or not, a lot of Ukrainians don't want to be in Russian-occupied territory. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and thank you so much for the support. Of course, it was kind of a brief answer, but I don't really think there's a lot to add to it. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right, and up next, we have a $10 super chat from Craig Platel, who says, "Enforcer, your website on MPG is wrong. MPG in the field, a good MPG, highway at least 14 MPG, commanded tow and heavy gun units have done 125 miles, highway, 2 days field trip, 125 miles back on one tank."
And of course, we have another know-it-all, and I'm just kidding, Craig Patel. Of course, you actually have experience to say otherwise, and I thank you very much for sharing your personal story and also your personal information with us, because considering that you do have experience with Humvees, it is good to know that that miles per gallon isn't that atrocious, because it almost seemed unbelievable to see 4 to 8 miles per gallon. And so I thank you so much for the support, and we are going to go back, considering that we have had an experienced, I guess you could say someone in the U.S. Army that had a lot to do with Humvees, say that it actually could get a lot better miles per gallon. And so with that, thank you so much for the support, Craig Patel. We're now going to change our statement on that to say that it can get up to about 14 miles per gallon. Well, at least 14 miles per gallon, which suggests that there's room for even better gas mileage. And thank you so much once again for sharing that information with us so we could change it. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again, Craig.
All right, and moving on to our next one, just looking through here, let's see. We have a $9 super chat from Jonesy, who says, "I am Jack, I'm 7. Jonesy is my mom. Ukraine has to win because I don't want the Russians to come to Washington. Glory to Ukraine and the heroes," and mom typed it for me. And also, Jack, it's good to hear from you, man. And also, you are a young Lee Springer, and it's good to have you putting in some good questions in the chat. and he says Ukraine has to win, and that's true. We don't want Ukraine, or we don't want the Russians to come to Washington. That is, we don't want them flying over and doing anything crazy. But Enforcer, what do you say?
And Jack, you've got to be the youngest Lee Spring Army member I've heard of yet. 7 years old and interested in this stuff. Now, that is something, and I think you've got a future ahead of yourself if you stay on the right path. Now, to talk about that for a second, I would have to say it is important to support the Ukrainians. That is 100% true. And of course, by supporting them, we ensure that the war doesn't go on further into other places. And while they will probably never make it to Washington, because the American military is the strongest in the world, they will make it into the rest of Europe if they succeed in Ukraine. They can make it to these countries up here. And considering that you were able to say all that, you must be incredibly smart for 7 years old. These countries up here that I'm circling with my mouse, they're called all together. There's 3 countries up here. They're called the Baltic states. And these countries, Russia could also invade and take over if they had succeeded in Ukraine. And it looks like they're losing right now, and so hopefully we won't see anything like that happen in the future. And so thank you so much once again for the support. And I'm glad that we were able to talk to the youngest member of the Lee Spring Army, Jack. That's really cool. And everyone, give a huge little round of applause and some support to Jack, because I think it's incredible to see that a kid at 7 years old is interested in this stuff. Not a lot of kids are interested in this. Not even a lot of people in my college are interested in it. And so it's a huge kudos to a kid to be that young and already interested in this kind of stuff. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for adding in your comments, Jack, because they are, of course, heavily appreciated here. And I'm glad to know that you're interested in this stuff. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
All right, and next up we have a $5 super chat from Smart Lucker, who says, got a band concert to play in, so putting in some money now. Have a good stream and catch y'all later. Take this money for your presidential campaign.
And I thank you so much for the support, and thank you for supporting the presidential campaign. I hope you're watching this on replay in the future, and that you did enjoy the news segment and also the question segment when we finally got to it. And so thank you so much once again, and also Slava Ukraini. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Philip Fixes, who says, look up before and after Fort Myers and Cape Coral. Ian was a killer. Your regular voice gets used in somber moments, and it's impactful. Slava Ukraine.
Thank you so much for the support. I actually have been using my high-pitched voice again tonight because we thought about it a little bit, and we were like, it does keep people interested. And if I start using a monotone voice, it takes away the specialty of Matthews. This is a reprieve for a lot of people to listen to. Well, not really a reprieve. It's interesting to have a dynamic mix in between Matthews' calmer and more monotone voice and my highly fluctuating and high-pitched voice. So I made sure to keep it. But gosh, yeah, that's pretty bad. We can also see here the before and after. It looks like the entire pool area of what appears to be a hotel is now submerged by a storm surge. But yikes. Here's appears to be a before picture of the area, and then here's the after picture. Goodness, that was actually a very devastating hurricane. Hopefully not a lot of people got killed in it. Hopefully, because there were some Lee Spring Army members that were in the area south of Tampa. Hopefully they didn't get too much damage or get in a bad fix because of it. But I thank you for the support and also bringing this to our attention for a second. And hopefully everyone gives their support and prayers to the state of Florida, because it looks like they're having a pretty tough time with another hurricane. Hurricanes have been a pretty big deal for the entirety of the Gulf Coast for as far back as anyone can remember historically, and they've never gotten any less potent. And so with that, we're going to be moving on to the next one, and thank you once again for the support.
Next, we have a $5 super chat from Cade Riddle, who says, evening, everyone. Is this enough to give a free question to the regular chat? And yes, Cade, it is. And this question is sponsored by Cade Riddle. And it goes to, let's see here, Happy Dragon, who says, Enforcer and Matthew, do you think it is about time for Ukraine to get all the weapons they need to just annihilate the occupying Russians and end the war already?
Sadly, we could give them all the weapons in the world, and it still will take time to take out the Russians and push them back. That's just how wars sadly work. But we have given them about all the weapons that the Ukrainian army can absorb into it at the moment, and they are using them to great effect. So sadly, The answer to that would be no, unfortunately. We have given them the best of the equipment we can provide, and hopefully, with time, they will be able to push the Russians out. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and thank you so much once again for supporting us and also sponsoring a live chat question. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right, and moving right along to our next one, we have a $5 super chat from Santiago Flores, who says, "Good evening, and I'm donating a live chat question." And Santiago, the live chat question goes to, let's see here, Richard Rohde, who says, "What will happen to camo when all the trees all lose their leaves and winter sets in?"
What will happen to Ukrainian camo?
Let's see. Let me go up and find the question here. What will happen to camo when the trees all lose their leaves and winter sets in?
Camo will still be effective, especially the lighter shades, as they'll still break their form against the, I guess you could say, the ground, and also the I guess you could say the hibernating trees. It still will work in a good way. But once the snow starts to fall, that's when camouflages will have to drastically change. Otherwise, you'll stick out like a sore thumb, because then you'll be a light shade of green and a sea of white. So with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. And thank you so much for the support and also sponsoring a live chat question. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right, and moving on to our next one, real quick to go out of order just for a moment. Jonesy puts in another $1 super chat and says, "WA is Western Australia." I thought WA was Washington here in the United States. So we don't want the Russians coming to Washington or Western Australia. But what say you, Enforcer?
I would have to say, I'm sorry about that. We unfortunately had a misunderstanding there. I would say that they certainly don't need to come to Western Australia either. And I'm certain that the Australian Army and the U.S. Army the entire world will do everything in their power to make sure that the Russians don't come to Western Australia. So with that, I'm sorry about that misunderstanding. I know that must have thrown Jack for a bit of a loop when y'all are in Australia and we start talking about Washington, D.C. So with that, sorry about that, but I do thank you so much for the support, and I'm sorry that we had a little bit of a misunderstanding there. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And next up, Vernon Hardapple puts in a $5 donation and says, "Enforcer, Matt's voice reminds me very much of Billy Bob Thornton." And is that the guy off of Hee Haw?
I don't know, but I do thank you for the support, and Matthew does have a lower voice, and I think that it is very conducive to his point in the stream. It makes his part very distinct, and a lot of people enjoy his voice, and I gotta say, it is pretty good. It's worthy of radio, like we're doing right now. And so with that, I thank you for the support. I hope that does address the comment, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Herp Derp NV, who says, "If you like caffeine, look for the original formula of a pre-workout called Jack 3D will turn night into day."
Well, I thank you for the support, but I got to say, Busy Nitro Cold Brew does the job for me. And I don't want to go any higher than that, because at that point, I'll just be asking for heart palpitations and massive cardiovascular issues. And so with that, I thank you for the support, but I don't think I want to up my caffeine intake from here. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Roland Schneider, who says, "When will the bulk of the U.S. Lend-Lease arrive in Ukraine?"
The bulk of the Lend-Lease, from what we've been told, will start to arrive in mid to late October. Beyond that, I don't really know a lot of additional information, and that may not be true, as it may already be arriving, or it may arrive at a later date. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and thank you once again for the support.
All right, and moving on to our next one, we have a $5 super chat from Barrett Jex, who says, "NATO is ready to respond unbelievably against Putin, not Russian people. Salute the Russians leaving Russia."
And I thank you for the support. I don't really want to salute the Russians leaving Russia, because I feel like a lot of people have been caught in the sentiments of the first wave that left Russia, the ones that did not support the war. These Russians, like we saw on video at the Kazakhstan border, are entirely male and able-bodied conscription-age men, and for that reason, I would have to assume that most of these men are trying to, I guess you could say, draft dodge in a way, and they most likely support Russia through and through and go, oh yeah, we should go into Ukraine and we should just beat them to death. And then when they actually get to the point where they're getting conscripted, then they want to jump ship. So I don't really want to applaud this group yet. It's not the families, the women, the children, and just the people in general who don't support the war. These are people who are trying to dodge the conscription, from what we can tell. Although there have been a decent amount of families that have been spotted at the Georgian border, and so it is a little bit of a double-edged sword, in a way. So with that, I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And thank you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Scott Furch, who says, Hummers have 16-inch of wheel travel made possible by large coil springs.
And I thank you so much for the support. I think, to be honest with you, it has leaf springs. It just must have leaf springs for that kind of suspension. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support and also the information on what kind of suspension the Humvee uses. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Tim Starr, who does not leave a comment, but thank you very much, Tim, for the support. And up next, we have a $5 donation from Craig Platel once again, who says, but the way HMMWV can run on jet fuel, it did for months with 2D tank BN2D Maldiv in Kuwait.
That's pretty interesting. I actually didn't know that. Is it like, I guess it's like a Chieftain's engine. It can run on almost any fuel. Hopefully not as unreliable as the Chieftain, as when the British Army would try and start those things up in the Army of the Rhine, only about 1 in 3 of the Chieftains would actually run. The other 2 were stuck in the motor pool. And so with that, I thank you for the support, and thank you for providing that little tidbit of information to us about the Humvee's engine. And with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $2 super chat from Chris Webb, who says, thank you for the news and coffee fund.
And thank you so much, Chris Webb, for the support, and thank you for helping us out with a coffee fund. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right, and moving right along, we have a $2 donation from Derek K and another $2 donation from Craig Platel. So thank you very much to both of you once again for the support. And moving right along, we have a $2 donation from Drew, who says it's safe to say that the U.S. has a new forever ally, RTR.
And I would have to say the Ukrainians will definitely be Western aligned probably through the rest of modern history, because there really is no one else for them to ally with, especially since the Russians have kind of put it to them by trying to invade their country. And so with that, I thank you for the support, and I'd have to agree with that statement. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and Tim Starr puts in another $1 donation, and thank you very much, Tim, once again for the second super chat of the night. And for our final one of the night, we have a $1 donation from Mark Redacted, who says, IMI Combat Guard, you won't regret it.
I will have to look into that one, and I'll have to see if it's a viable option. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment. And was that our last super chat of the night?
That was our last super chat of the night.
All right. And so with that, we're going to answer live chat questions for the next 8 minutes. I know that this is making the stream a little bit shorter than normal by about 20 minutes, but we have to get up incredibly early in the morning tomorrow and set off on our way to go run some errands. And so with that, we're going to be answering live chats for the next 8 minutes. And so with that, let's get to it.
All right. And first up, we have a question from Midwest Viking, who says, question, do you think Americans in Russia will get conscripted?
I don't think Americans in Russia will get conscripted because that will have some massive diplomatic issues that would come with them. And so with that, I hope that answers the question, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Rob Bertram. Once again, he's throwing in tremendous support tonight, and thank you very much for that, Rob. He says, I'll never forget that moment. What is that? Is that a leaf spring?
That's a pretty good moment, Rob. That set off the entire Leaf Spring Army as a thing and a culture. And honestly, a defining moment of this channel. It was a pretty funny one. And also, I guess you could say it shows my ability to, I guess you could say, correct things and learn in a way, because right after that, I would correct that statement by saying leaf springs are modern and used on a lot of vehicles, but the joke would still stick, and it's become a defining thing of this channel. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support, Rob Bertram, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and next up, we have a question from Cody Griffith, who says, does Putin actually plan on using tactical nukes, or is it just an empty threat that he throws out every other week? It's hard to tell if he's bluffing or just a coward.
In my opinion, I would have to say he is most likely bluffing because he's been threatening nuclear weapons literally since the very beginning of the special operation. He said if anyone tries to intervene in any way, there will be the consequences that historically have never happened to anyone, which means nuclear weapons. And then we started giving support to Ukraine, and he didn't do anything. So I feel like this is a bunch of hot air. But Matthew thinks differently, and it's honestly contentious amongst a lot of people. No one really knows the exact answer to it, but that would be my opinion on it. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and next up we have a question from, well, actually we don't have a question. We have the two decoders of the stream, WF2U and Mark Hodges, who figured out the Morse code. They say, Enforcer, tonight's plain language telegraph message was typed as the message was heard. Where did you come from? Where did you go? Where did you come from, Risky-Fi Joe?
And I thank you so much for the support. Well, not the support, actually the deciphering, because that was the correct message. Of course, right off a little late, but there are still 4,720 people here to listen to it, and I hope you all enjoyed that little Morse code message. And so thank you so much to both of our Morse code decoders, Mark Hodges and WF2U, who have been here and just with great conviction, always deciphering those Morse code messages. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you to both of y'all for once again getting the Morse code message down. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Richard Parnell, who says, Enforcer, is it true that Belarus is sending troops into the Ukraine?
I have not seen any actual verifiable evidence that that Belarusian troops have made it into Ukraine. We have seen Uzbek troops in Ukraine, which are a stand-serious country further south of Kazakhstan. But to be honest with you, I have not seen any Belarusian forces to speak of. We have seen at one point a Belarusian marked tank, but we never saw proof of a Belarusian crew. So it appears to be a lended vehicle from Belarus that the Russians used. And so with that, I hope that addresses the question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $4 super chat from Tim Starr, who says, all this information will be documented in history, so what you're doing is amazing. You're legends. Good night.
And he threw up a little finger sign at the very end. And of course, I thank you so much for the support, Tim Starr, and all the kind words. And I hope that people look back on this news coverage, which happened literally every single day of the war, and go, wow, that was well documented. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. Thank you for the kind words as well. And you are amazing, and you have a great night. Finger thing. And with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And up next, we have a question from X Mojo, who says, did you hear about Russia putting in a rush order for potassium iodide? It's kind of spooky.
I think we have seen them issuing potassium iodine tablets to their soldiers months ago, and it is kind of spooky, but I think that may just be a PsyOps thing. PsyOps hasn't been here, has he, tonight?
Not tonight, he hasn't.
Huh, that's odd. That just made me think it's PsyOps, but anyways, it may just be a PsyOps thing because they haven't used nukes even after they did that months ago. And so with that, I hope that answers the question. We are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a question from Pakatang, who says, are there any pro-Russian channels for those in the LSA to speak the truth to and recruit viewers to the Enforcer now that there is doubt within the enemy?
Yes, Patrick Lancaster would probably be the best one. I don't really look around for a lot of pro-Russian YouTube channels because I don't really care for them. So unfortunately, that's the only one I could think of off the top of my head. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a question from Lukeman, who says, do you see the Americans putting boots on the ground if Putin uses a nuke?
I do, actually. I think that that would be most likely America's response is direct military intervention at that point. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, although brief. And with that, also, Spencer G said, the Ukraine has its origin from Soviet times when it wasn't its own country. And I think that a lot of people may have been missing Matthew's context that he said that in. Whenever we say the Ukraine, it's a deliberate choice based off of an episode in Seinfeld where Kramer and, what was his name? Newman were playing a game of Risk.
Yes.
Yeah, and they were on the subway, and Newman had been pretty much cornered in Ukraine, and then Kramer was in there, you're done, you're over for, and then Newman said, I am not over, I have forces in the Ukraine, and then Kramer went, the Ukraine is weak, it's feeble, and then there was a Ukrainian man on the subway who said, Ukraine is not weak, and it's Anyways, it's a whole entire joke between Matthew and me. So if we say the Ukraine, it's in reference.
Well, actually, Enforcer, I was just reading that off a chat.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting. So stop ever giving heat to Matthew Irwin. He was just reading the thing. But with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Jeanette, who says, Enforcer, can the Ukrainians capture the 4 zones and hold their own referendums and take the vote? We all know everyone would vote to be Ukrainian.
There's no reason for the Ukrainians to hold referendums when retaking their own sovereign land, because then that makes it seem like there is actually people in that area that may want to be a part of Russia. This is just a matter of regaining their land. That would be a lot like going in the American Civil War as a comparison, and I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying that it wouldn't make too much sense rather than just trying to do kind of like a tit for tat thing, I guess you could say. It would be like the Union defeating the Confederate States of America and then holding elections in the southern United States, the defeated Confederate States, asking them if they want to remain as the Confederate States of America or not. It wouldn't really make a lot of sense, as that land was originally the United States of America's land, and then they retook it, much like Ukraine would be doing with this land here. They would just be retaking the land that was once theirs. And so really no reason to, I guess you could say, run referendums. And so with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so who is the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is Sweet70433, who says, question, can you gander a guess as to how many people have left Russia? Is a bigger number better? Any threat to countries gaining Russians than having them annexed too?
There would probably be no threat to these countries gaining Russians. The Russians will most likely just have to chalk it up as a loss, population loss on their end. But as far as we know, I've heard somewhere in the number of 1.4 million Russians, somewhere around 1.2% of their population has fled the country, which is sizable actually for the Russians, considering that none of their land is in any sort of battlefield or a front line. So all of these civilians are leaving entirely due to disagreements of what the Russian government's doing. It's actually quite a large exodus in modern terms. But with that, I don't really see these countries that are taking in these Russians coming under any kind of threat in the future. And so with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well, at least on the statistics side. Take it with a grain of salt because the statistics may not be entirely accurate. I'm trying to quote them off the top of my head. But with that, we reached the end of tonight's stream. I thank you all so much for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure to sit here and discuss the war in Ukraine again on day 219 of the war, discuss the news, and also answer many interesting questions, both from the live chat and sent in via Super Chat. I thank you all so much to everyone who sent in the Super Chat for continuing to support this channel, so that way we can continue this coverage daily. And with that in mind, I will see you all tomorrow on day 220 of the war in Ukraine to cover the next 24 hours of news. Thank you all so much once again. Stay safe, have a great night, and take care.